Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Ferndale City Council meeting for Monday, October 24th, 2016. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Marnie, would you call the roll, please?
Council members Leaks May.
Here.
Martin.
Here.
Pollica.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Piana.
Here.
And Mayor Coulter.
Here, thank you, and we have a quorum this evening. Next item of business would be the approval of the agenda.
Your Honor, I'd like to add a regular agenda item 7C, which would be the appointment of Lydia Jakovsky, Sarah Doty, and Matt Livengood to the Ferndale Arts and Culture Commission for terms expiring 12/31/17.
And I believe everyone got a copy of those walked on.
Council has a copy of their applications in front of them.
Excellent.
I also recommend changing the order of presentations with the Ferndale Beautification Awards going to A and Ferndale's, and then everything just goes to the top of the presentation list.
Excellent. Okay. And I guess on that vein, because a couple of our presentations are going to be a little longer than usual, I would also recommend, if council's amenable, moving call to audience up as well, so that there's someone from the audience that doesn't want to sit through the presentations, they can address us before.
I'll support
I'll make that motion.
Okay. All right. So we don't actually have a motion on the agenda yet.
You need to make the motion.
So I would move that we accept the agenda with the amendments listed.
Support.
All right. Moved by Martin, supported by Pollica. Any other changes, suggestions, comments on the agenda? All right. Marnie, would you call the roll, please?
Council members Martin.
Yes.
Pollica.
Yes.
Piana.
Yes.
Leaks May.
Yes.
And Mayor Coulter.
Yes, thank you. The agenda is adopted. So now moving on we'll call the audience. If there's anyone here from the audience that would like to address council at this time, this is your opportunity to do so. Come on up to the podium. You get 3 minutes to speak on whatever you'd like. I'll give us your name and your address if you're comfortable doing that, and the floor is yours.
My name is Matt Flynn, 23315 Woodward Avenue, Ferndale. I just wanted to come and thank the city for allowing us to do Oktoberfest on Vester this past weekend. I think it was a successful event. I know that we had some noise complaints the first evening, and then worked with the police to make sure there was a level that was in accordance with the rules in Ferndale. But I wanted to come in and thank everybody, and Michael for helping out and pushing it through, and the police and public safety and everything.
Good. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Yeah, anyone else that would like to address council this evening? Hello, Sharon.
Hello, I'm Sharon Chess, and I'm here representing the Ferndale Community Concert Band, and we are getting ready to start our second season. Our very first concert of the second season is this Sunday, October 30th, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon at the Ferndale High School Auditorium. Accompanying our concert is also a wonderful bake sale. We're fortunate that not only are our talented musicians great at playing music, they're also wonderful cooks. One of them in particular is great at making smoked turkey legs and her own barbecue sauce. So be prepared to come in and buy turkey legs, $10 each, and they're worth $20. So if you want to donate $20 for a turkey leg, we'll accept that. And for those of you who still may be unfamiliar with the Ferndale Community Concert Band, we are an adult concert band. The majority of our musicians are retired or still working as music directors in local area high schools. Two of our musicians won the Mr. Holland's Opus Award in 2007, 2010. Several of our musicians have played in Carnegie Hall. Lots of them are professionals, and we're worth coming out to see. We're 60 members strong and still growing. The age range is 14 to 80 years old, and as long as you're proficient in music, we invite you to come out and join us. So please, Sunday, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Ferndale High School. Come listen to us. Bring pocket money. The concerts are free. The baked goods are not. Okay. And then on another note, we had an opportunity for our very first time to participate in the Oktoberfest last weekend. We had 13 volunteers from our band and a couple of friends of the band, and we had a ball. It was a great opportunity for us to get our name out there as well, and it was wonderful fun. We were fortunate to have decent weather for 2 of the 3 days, and even the third day was great. But Matt and Regina were great to work for, and everybody that came to our booth, we were pourers, just had nothing but great things to say about the event. So it was a pleasure working with them at that event. Thank you.
Good. Thanks, Sharon. Good evening.
Good evening, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jason Storms. I'm with the Ferndale Arts and Culture Commission, and this is our treasurer, Joanne Wilcock. We just wanted to make the council and everyone aware about a mural that we finished during the Funky Ferndale Art Fair. We had a contest and awarded Ferndale student Desiree Emmy $250 in scholarship money with the help... 500. Oh, I'm sorry, 500. With the help of the Ferndale Community Foundation. This is going to be going up on the side of the Cupcake Station, probably in November sometime, we're thinking. And the Ferndale Arts and Culture Commission is also able to raise $120 through community donations in the community painting of this. So,
Excellent. When can we expect to see it on the shop?
Well, I think we're hoping to do it during the Ice Fest
Oh, okay.
and doing it as a presentation and all. So, or maybe even earlier, but we'll let you know.
Okay. Thank you. Great.
Thanks,
Looks
everyone.
wonderful.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
If I may, through the chair, I know
Yes.
it's called the audience, but I just want to recognize Jason. He recently took over the Arts and Culture Commission. Has really done a great job doing a whole bunch of thinking and herding cats there in a very short amount of time. So I really appreciate your work effort. Thank you.
Thank you. Not sure the rest of the commission is going to appreciate
I'll
that
hear about it
description.
either way, whatever.
Good evening.
Good evening. I'm Bernie Frazier. I live on West Saratoga. Pardon my ignorance. I wanted to talk a little bit about the parking proposal that's coming up this evening. I'm not sure if I could address now or if I have to wait on that.
It's on the agenda, and you're supposed to technically wait, but if you want to, it is going to be at the end of the agenda, so if you want to say something now, I'm fine with that.
Sure. I had quite a few things I wanted to say about it. My house, the back of my house, butts up to where you're proposing to place this parking garage, and it's only going to be 15 feet from where I have a barbecue. So obviously, it's a great concern to me, as well as many of my neighbors. Ultimately, I guess I'd ask that you postpone this vote. It seems from the letter that nothing was initiated or considered. According to the letter we received Friday evening, I received this letter about this meeting and about this Friday evening. So it's been really less than one business day notice to all the residents that are going to be affected by this. And when we went online and we started looking, we discovered that there's been an architectural firm was at a meeting on Wednesday, that there's a plan for a possible 4 to 6 story building with apartments and that. Obviously a little different from what this letter told us. So obviously we're quite concerned about that. It seems that according to what we can read online, that the businesses had an opportunity to present their case. They're concerned about what the timing of the building would be. Using the parking garage over for Credit Union 1. So obviously they had an ability to give an input, and the residents would seek to have that same right. And so we'd like to ask that be postponed. I know there are several residents here. Many couldn't make it because, as I said, we just got this letter on Friday evening. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And just so you know, we will go into obviously much more detail later in the agenda on that topic. Anyone else would like to address council this evening and call the audience? All right, moving on then into presentations. And per our switch, we'll let the Ferndale Beautification Awards presentation go first. It is that special time of year when we do the Beautification Awards. Robin.
Hello, and thank you. We were fortunate to have some really cool houses to view this year. When we first started out with the commission, before we got to the beautification awards, though, we had to recognize the block awards. We always give an award each year to one block that is outstanding in the city. This particular block lays between our own Mapledale from 2000 to 2200. We hosted a little event for them one Saturday morning, and the commission provided refreshments and all. We had over 20 residents attend the meeting, which compared to last year was quite outstanding. They seem very, very happy to receive that award, and we're very pleased that we recognize them. The sign that was placed in their community was obviously done by the Ferndale DPW. So we would like to thank them for having such a beautiful block. The next set is the Beautification Awards, or the Beautification Awards, as we've going to call them. The first house in the awards is 261 West Saratoga. It's in the southwest quadrant, and it is owned by John Ciambelli and Brooke Kerouac. Are you here, either of you? That is an actual coffin in their front yard. That is not a prop that you find at CVS, just so you know.
Empty, I hope.
and just so you know, everybody that has won an award will be receiving a lovely beautification sign to go in their yard. Okay. The next house is at 410 East Woodland, which is in the northeast section. Is Eric and Liz Minnie here?
We're here.
There you go. Awesome. Come on up. Ironically, about 6 or 7 days ago, we only had, come back here behind us, only had 8 nominations, and by the time everyone was loaded in the bus and taking the tour, there were 49.
Wow. Wow. Stiff competition.
It would be safe to say that Ferndalians wait till the last minute.
I think that goes without saying.
Thank you, guys. It was awesome. And then the next home, 573 West Camborne. It's in the northwest quadrant. This one is owned by Dan Davis and Keith Vanson, and they actually were featured in the Free Press Homestyle magazine for their yard, and it is all themed Day of the Dead. Is Dan and Keith here? No? Okay.
That's wonderful.
The next house is 236 Spencer. It's in the southeast quadrant and is owned by Paul Miller. Is Paul here? Okay. And your wife. I'm sorry, Paul, all I had was your name because we looked up at the county records. Okay. That's beautiful. There we go. Thanks so much for your efforts.
Congratulations.
And then, you know, we don't get out much, the Beautification Commission. And so when we have an opportunity to get in the van and travel all over the city, the comment was made, we drove for 2 hours and never left Ferndale. But we have a good time with it. And there was one house in particular that we just thought was most beautiful, and it is the most scariest in all the land. And if you get a chance to go over to 230 Flowerdale, you really need to check that house out. Is Cheryl Larson here? Cheryl? The lights and the decor are awesome. So if you get a moment, go over there and check them out before Halloween. Finally, just a quick note, we will be doing our final big activity for the year coming up very, very soon called the Holiday Lights nominations. For those of you who waited until 2 or 3 days before the actual tour, if you're going to be nominating for Holiday Lights, we'll ask that you please get it in a little bit quicker if you could so we could get our route settled. But other than that, thank you so much.
Wow.
And I hope you have a wonderful Halloween.
Great job. Thanks to the committee, and thanks to all the winners. Yeah.
Robin.
Robin.
I just wanted to thank you because, or whomever nominated Ian for his award. My son Ian is 15, and he received that notification that his house had been booed, so he was very thrilled about that. So thank
Well,
you
we're
for
trying to
that.
step up our game.
Yeah.
In the past, people just got nominated and they didn't know it.
Right.
For the yeah, I know, it was sort of a guerrilla. For the summer awards, we do give them a letter letting them know that they're nominated. I don't know that we did. Did we do that for the beautification as well?
So that's what
We
she's
did
saying.
for the ones that we had early,
Yeah.
I believe.
Yeah.
So we're trying to make sure that people are aware, because a lot of times when you pull up in a big van and people fall out in your yard and you're wondering what the heck is going on, I just think it would help cut down on violence. So thanks so much.
Great job, Robin. Thank you. All right. Well, I don't know how you top that, but the tree canopy study folks are going to try. So who's introducing the tree canopy?
I can start that.
We're going down the line. Are they here?
Ferndale Schools. Oh,
wanna do
yeah,
Ferndale
that's right. I
Schools
skipped over them.
All
Yep,
right,
I'm
Lee,
sorry.
hang on. We're going to do one more.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's right. I'm sorry. We go back to A, which is the Ferndale Schools. I apologize. Yes. And our school board trustee, Amy Butters, is here. Sorry, Amy. Didn't mean to skip you.
I think it's required for us all to have a yard sign during the presentations
Apparently.
tonight, so I brought this one along.
It's a theme we've got going here. Yeah.
My name's Amy Butters, and I'm here from the Ferndale School Board tonight, and I haven't been to one of your meetings for a while, so I wanted to compliment the paint job. It looks really nice. But yes, I did bring our new Eagle Pride sign. They're popping up around town. I couldn't help but notice that there isn't one right out here at City Hall, so I'm happy to leave this one here for you. And please let me know if you need one in your yard, and I can drop one by, or we can assign that to somebody. But these are, I really like them. I think they look really nice, and of course they're paid for by Jim Schaefer, and so he gets his picture on the sign, which is a nice thank you to him for supporting Ferndale schools. So that's my first thing, but really,
And if people want one, how should
Yeah.
they get one?
I took this one right off of the grounds of Ferndale High School.
I'm guessing that's not what you want the rest of us to do.
You're welcome to do that, actually, Raylan. I imagine you have one on your yard.
I've already taken one from Ferndale High School,
Yes.
so yes.
So that's where,
You can
literally,
take it.
that's where
They
you
do.
can
They
get one.
do put those out, extra ones out. They put them out starting homecoming weekend. They are meant for people to come take one.
right.
So please help yourself.
Okay.
Or if you know a student or a parent, anybody can hook you up with one. So.
Gotcha.
But technically, first on my list, we don't like to play favorites too much on this Ferndale School Board, but this year I do have to admit that I have a favorite activity that I would like to highlight tonight, and that is our Ferndale High School football team has made the playoffs. Yes. So we're super excited. This is the first time since 2008 that they have gotten this far. That you have to win 6 games to get to the playoffs, and our Eagles are 7-2 this year. So they are super excited. They just found out last night that they're playing Detroit Martin Luther King High School, and they were the champs last year, right? They were the state champs last year, so it is a tough draw, but our kids are super pumped, and they're raring to go because it's a long time coming, and they're ready to put Ferndale back on the map. So I wanted to let you know that that's this Friday, 5 o'clock at King High School, so it's an away game, but we're really hoping for a nice big crowd to cheer on our football team Friday night, and I'm super proud of them. And of course, Chief Collins is very involved with the football program, and it's a super exciting time for our district. So I wanted to list that as my first item. I have quite a few others. I'll try to go through them fairly quickly. We also have some excellent tennis players at Ferndale High School, and I wanted to highlight 3 of them that I was told about today. Carson Keller, Tim Castleman, and Ed Harris. They are tennis players on our boys tennis team that made the all-league team this year. Carson plays number one singles, and Tim and Ed play number one doubles. And so we want to congratulate them for that great accomplishment. A few things coming up for your calendar. It's a really busy couple of weeks coming up this weekend next. Wednesday night is the Ferndale High School Marching Band's show. It's called Dinner and a Show. And what that means is you are welcome to come watch their show Wednesday night. It's going to start at 8:30 up at Ferndale High School, up at the football field. The admission is free to the event, so you can come and see the show, but there will be raffle tickets for sale. We have a number of local restaurants that have donated gift cards, and we'll be raffling those off Wednesday night. So that's happening at 8:30. And if you haven't seen the show yet, you are going to be amazed. These kids have been working so hard, and they've already had a few competitions, and they've been getting great scores. Their show is called The Lines We Draw, and it's very entertaining, and so I definitely recommend that event Wednesday. Then Thursday evening is our annual Hijinks and Hilarity concert at Ferndale High School, and this is the orchestra and the choir, those two groups from Ferndale High School, and it's a Halloween themed, so continuing the Halloween theme. All of the performers dress in costume, and everyone in the audience is encouraged to dress in costume. It is definitely a family-friendly concert. The kids are going to be playing Disney music and Star Wars music. So it's going to be a fantastic show. The kids that come, the audience members that come dressed in a costume are invited up on the stage to do a little trick-or-treating during the concert. So it's a really fun concert for both the performers and the audience. So that's this Thursday at 7 o'clock. Okay, then next week, also in the Ferndale High School auditorium, is The Hobbit. That's our fall play, and that's going to be Friday and Saturday, the 11th and 12th. Is that next week? Is that right? Yeah, I think it is.
That's
2 weeks. Thank you. Yeah, I'm thinking it's not next week. It's 2 weeks. 11th and 12th, Friday and Saturday at 7:30, and then Sunday, the 13th, 3 o'clock matinee. It's again, The Hobbit. It's a family-friendly show, so I encourage anybody to come see our kids perform that. I wanted to talk a little bit about a new organization that's happening over at our Ferndale Upper Elementary campus. These are the 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders. We have a new Lego robotics team, and these are 4th and 5th graders, and we have 37 participants already participating, and we have 8 adult coaches. And my favorite thing about this is we have 10 high school kids that are mentoring the younger kids. Many of you know we have a very successful high school robotics team here at Ferndale, and these kids from that team are volunteering to help the elementary kids learn about robotics, and they use Legos, which is something that is a little bit more natural for the younger kids. And so they have to build a robot, and it's an animal theme. They have to. One of the parent volunteers told me a couple of the things that they have to design the robot to do is to help a Lego seeing eye dog. They have to create a seeing eye dog and help it, and then they also have to pick up Lego manure. So I thought that was very creative. It's all animal related. It's an animal theme this year. Every year they come up with a different theme. So I thought, well, that kind of piqued my interest a little bit. It's a good way to keep the kids interested. So anyway, that's happening. And if you ever see, like sometimes on Facebook, you might see notices about bottle drives. I know this organization is doing bottle drives occasionally, and so that's a good way to support this organization, if you ever see those around. One last thing that I wanted to recognize, something that happened in the past, a couple of different events that have happened that I wanted to thank the city for their support. is we had at the high school a couple of Saturdays ago, we had a prayer breakfast, the first annual prayer breakfast sponsored by the Southeast Oakland Coalition. I know that Mayor Coulter and Councilman Polika were there for that event. It was nice. I thought it was a really great gathering of our community. We got to hear from a lot of different folks and just come together. Unity and peace, of course, was the theme, and it was a great community event, and I'm looking forward to more of those. And then the other one was last Saturday at Ferndale High School. They had a law enforcement youth summit, and I know they had a pretty good turnout. Chief, do you happen to know? It was maybe 20 or 30 kids?
There was about 50 kids.
50 kids?
That was way less than what we wanted. We're going to expand it. We wanted a couple hundred kids in this town.
Yeah, I mean, it was a start, though. I think it's a great idea to bring together high school students and members of the police department to talk about issues and to talk about concerns that we all have about things that are going on throughout our country, and to try to understand what we're all going through. And it's bringing the people together. I think is a great thing, and I wanted to thank everyone for their support of that event. Very last thing on my list, don't forget, Election Day is coming up. There is a school board election on the ballot. Please go all the way down your ballot and participate all the way through. We really appreciate all the community involvement in our school district.
Thank you, Amy. We appreciate you. Thank you. All right, now the tree canopy study would be next, and April.
Melanie. Mayor Pro Tem is going to take it.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Mayor Pro Tem Piana is going to introduce that item.
I wanted to introduce a member of the Ferndale Environmental Sustainability Commission who is in the audience tonight, Mark Van Dyke, who's been a longstanding member of the FESC and has been helping support and guide the urban tree canopy assessment currently underway. The FESC has been working very hard this past year, helping guide the development of sustainability measures for our master land use plan, and they're really involved in giving feedback with this tree canopy assessment. So, Mark, did you want to come up and say anything? I'm putting you, okay. But I just wanted to acknowledge the hard work that the FESC committee members are doing, and this is one of the major items that they've been working on for 2016, and this will continue into 2016 or 17. Can't believe it's almost the end of the year. On that note, I'd like to hand it over to Matt Davis, our Deputy Director of Public Works, to introduce our guest and who's going to present where we are with this project. And just to remind people, I think Council approved this contract back in about a year ago. Take it over, Matt.
That is correct. And this is Lee Mueller with Davie Resources Group, who was awarded the contract. Lee is a community forestry consultant for Davie, and tonight he'll be doing a little presentation to go over the project and some of the findings of it. So.
Unfortunately, I don't have any special events, awards, or signs to give out tonight. But hopefully we can collectively get excited about the many beautiful trees in your community.
We'll get a sign that says this is a great tree or something for your lawn.
The sign say this was a great tree?
Yeah.
Some of my suggestions are about community engagement, so maybe we can brainstorm some of that together. But yeah, we started working with the city about a year ago on tree inventory and urban tree canopy assessment, ordinance review, and then at the end of this, we're capping it all off with a management plan once we finish the inventory. But I want to go over a couple of the inventory results first and foremost. By the way, I like discussions better than lectures. Okay. So if you have any questions or want to stop me any time for any of this, please do so. We did phase one of the inventory, which included 1,814 sites. 1,756 of those were trees and 58 of those were stumps. So in addition to trees, we were identifying any stumps that remained from previous removals that the city could go ahead and remove. So you can see we navigated all of the streets. We had our certified arborists go through and collect a various amount of data on every tree. Yeah.
Can we take one step backwards
Yeah.
and just sort of say that the tree canopy assessment is separated into 4 major chunks, and that this is not the entire assessment of the whole city, correct?
Right. This is the first phase of 4 of the
right.
inventory.
So I just want to make sure people understand that
Geographically,
yes,
Yep.
phases, and that this will be going on a 3-4 year rolling basis.
Yeah, the contract was once a year for 4 years. So we'll hopefully be starting again. This coming year we have an option to look at maybe straddling the fiscal year to get both 2 phases done at once, but that's totally up to the option of the city.
Right. And then if I may, I didn't say it during the presentation or the setup, that the reason we're doing this urban tree canopy study, the purpose is to figure out how do we plant more trees in the community, how do we encourage and educate residents on what trees to plant, not only in their own yards, and also update the tree planting choices for the city overall. So what the city can do and the city-owned property in the right-of-way, and then what can we do to offer to residents in terms of education and resources to support them planting their own trees. And this was the first step in that process to sort of say, well, how many trees do we have? Where are they located? What state of health are they in? And then looking at our policies internally to update them to reflect this enhanced program services for our residents.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah, and as you'll note, the tree inventory is just along the public streets and within some public parks. So this is only public property. We'll talk a little bit about the private property aspect a little bit later. The data we collected on the public trees, which again are streets and parks, was the location of that tree. We got both GPS coordinates so it can fit into any asset management system the city currently has, as well as the address, species, size, the condition of that tree. The condition is an assessment of its health. The maintenance need, does it need pruning? Does it need removal? Is it a stump removal? Risk rating. We go through a process of what is the likelihood of that tree to fail. If it does fail, what is the likelihood of it hitting anything? And if it hits anything, how much damage might it cause? And based on this, we come up with an objective risk statement from low to extreme. We also did whether or not further inspection might be necessary, overhead utilities. That's really important for contractors to know whether or not they're going to be dealing with charged electrical lines or not, or city crews. And then also just general observations and notes. Again, we collected these data on every single tree we assessed. So in general, we found that the vast majority of Ferndale's trees are in good condition. When I look at this graph, for example, with this many trees in good and fair condition, that's better than I see in most communities we work. So I would say Ferndale's been doing a pretty good job of keeping their trees up to grade here. A lot of times I see fair being the largest category in different communities. I just want to point out that dead is the tree is absolutely dead. Critical, I mean nothing green on the tree. And critical means there's nothing that could be done to bring that tree's health back up. Poor trees, maybe there's still something that could be done to improve the condition of that tree, but critical, there is nothing.
I'm sorry. Then what's the difference between critical and dead?
Well, so critical means there might still be live tissue. There could still be green leaves on a portion of the tree, but it's on its way out no matter what you do. There's nothing that can be done to save that tree.
Okay.
It's a fine distinction, but it's best practice.
So if you've got dead and alive, what's other?
Yeah, NA, you mean?
Zombie.
NA are primarily stumps.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. These are great questions.
You asked for them.
I did.
Fair warning. I tried to keep them in check for you.
I have to keep trees interesting somehow. All right, so this is just kind of looking at the different risk levels we had in Ferndale and the different activities that need to occur. So again, we have stump removal there, which is at NA. You had no extreme trees. I mentioned this before to Matt and April. When we see extreme trees, they very rarely make it into the inventory because those are the kind of trees that arborist goes, okay, I don't want to stand under this tree. You guys need to get out here and take care of it immediately. So high and moderate, you had 7 high and a total of 53 moderate. Those have already been taken care of. The city has already gone through and taken care of all the high and moderate trees, so all that's left, based on the inventory data, things may have changed a little since then, are low-risk trees. So that's very good, very encouraging. We did Detroit street tree inventory, and I can say it's a very different circumstance there. So this is really encouraging to see as well, and I applaud Matt for getting around to that already. I also like to look at what is kind of the distribution of the size of your trees. So young trees are up to about 6 inches. Established trees are getting up into 12, and then so on and so forth. So you have usually we see just an angle down. What I look at this is I see that you have a lot of these mature trees. And so that means in the long term you may start to see some of those senesce. You may start to see some additional tree care needs if you're going to want to maintain those long term, additional pruning, treatment, etc. Those trees are just aging, and the urban environment is not meant for trees necessarily to grow, so they may require a little bit of additional care if you wish to retain those trees. But otherwise, I think that looks great. Obviously, you're continuing to plant and add new trees as well, which is an encouraging sign. Species distribution, this is really important because I'm sure you guys are aware we've had various invasive species in recent years that have taken out some of our trees, particularly ash. So we as professionals do get very concerned when we see too much of any one species or particular any one genera. So if you talk about all maples or all ash or all oak. And looking at this right now, you have 36% maple trees in your community, and that is a little bit high. I would like to see that closer to 20%, 25% would be ideal. And that's just in case we do get a maple bug like the Asian longhorn beetle that's currently down in Ohio. So these are just things we want to look for long term. Otherwise, I'd say Norway maple. These are scientific names. So Acer is maple, and Acer platanoides is Norway maple, and that's your only species over 10% of your population, which is also really good. Often I see 20% species in various categories. So I want to talk now about your urban tree canopy assessment. And this is where we actually looked a little bit more at the entire tree canopy on both public and private lands across the entire city, not just from a management perspective along streets. So what we do is we take data provided by the USDA, United States Department of Agriculture, and this is satellite photography that takes pictures, and there's different reflections given off by trees, by grass, by pavement, and we can use software to categorize what those are. So we can see where the tree canopy is, where the pavement is, where there might be bare soil, or where there might be low-lying vegetation like grass. We begin to look at trends. Where is this? Where is there tree? Where are there not trees? Where there might be opportunities for improvement. And so in Ferndale, we estimated that you have 30% tree canopy, 50% impervious surfaces. So this is pavement, buildings, sidewalks, parking lots. And then you also have 19% what we call pervious surface. So this is shrubs, grass, low-lying vegetation, things of that nature, and then a little bit of bare soil. You don't have any open water in our classification. By comparison, I have several communities there. Alma, Michigan has 23% tree canopy, East Point 14%, Ferndale, you're at 30%. Grand Rapids, Michigan is at 35%, Harbor Springs, Michigan is at 40%, Hillsdale, Michigan is at 36%, Mount Clemens at 20%, and Roseville at 11%. So these are other communities we've worked with, and we have these various numbers to display as well. Any questions so far? All right, I want to see. Yeah, I have some maps. So I can look at this too, and I'll tell you a couple immediate findings we saw. One was that the largest land use classification with trees that have the most trees is, as one might expect, residential properties at 40% tree canopy. However, we saw that public parks was at 30%, and I can't remember what public lands is at, but both parks and public lands, there's a little bit of a distinction there between schools, parks, right, had more impervious surface than they had tree canopy. And I don't see that very often. Usually public lands have more tree canopy than they do impervious surfaces. You have sports fields, you have all these things. So that's just kind of something to think about, how your parks and public lands fit in to this question about impervious versus pervious surfaces. The other thing, as you might see, is some of your main business and thoroughfare corridors have really high impervious surfaces. And so I see that as opportunities potentially when you have street reconstruction projects or business district beautification projects to think a little bit more about how do you maybe bring some green space into those areas. Why that's important is because those trees can help intercept rainfall before it gets into the stormwater system. And where that matters most is where you have the most pavement. From that perspective, we were able to calculate the economic benefits of Ferndale's tree canopy. This is using the U.S. Forest Service's iTree suite of software, which is academically reviewed, peer-reviewed software that basically models the impact of tree canopy. So every year, your trees capture 549 pounds of carbon monoxide, 4,760 pounds of nitrogen dioxide. It removes 35,560 pounds of ozone. CO and NO2 are greenhouse gases, whereas O3 is usually the one that, when we talk about air quality standards, really matters. SO2, sulfur dioxide, is primarily when we talk about acid rain, the impact there. And then particulate matter is largely what causes asthma when we talk about asthma rates and urban air quality. So I'm not going to list all these numbers. You can read them there. But I do want to point out the big one generally is stormwater. So every year your trees are capturing 49 million gallons of stormwater every year. And it has a value of approximately $435,000 each year. So to give you an idea of where that comes from, because this is kind of the easiest one to talk about, is there is a certain cost to build stormwater capacity. Stormwater engineers will say for us to manage another million gallons of stormwater, we would need to build X additional pipes, and it has a cost. And so we can compare those costs to exactly the gallons of water that trees capture, and we can compare exactly those economic measures to come up with what basically the value is on this piece of infrastructure. So stormwater in most communities is usually the big one. You can go a step further and also calculate energy rates in some cases, and that's also another big one. Usually, trees help reduce energy needs in front of houses, buildings, etc. The other thing I want to point out is that you have current stored carbon as well. So this is not every year, but currently what's stored in the trees. Trees use carbon to grow, and so that's 90,000 tons of carbon for a value of about $3.2 million. So the point of this is trees have economic value, and these are just a few of the economic values. Go ahead.
Well, you got me on the stormwater.
Yep.
Some of these others, the economic value, you're losing me on. So let's go to the asthma one,
yes.
the particle matter. That $34,375 is deferred cost from what?
So for you to achieve that similar benefit, you'd have to pay for technology to remove that much particulate matter.
So it's not medical costs from asthma. It's not any of those other.
No. These models we're using here do not go to that depth. The research is starting to catch up there, but it's not part of the model.
So can you give me a tangible example of what that money would go to if we didn't have these trees for particulate matter?
So, there's various technologies in air scrubbing, for example.
Okay.
And so that would be it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. The other thing I want to point out, though, is this is just a finite example of the benefits that trees offer. There's really interesting research right now across the country where they're showing that trees improve property values by as much as 9%, rental rates by 10 to 12. They're showing business districts with trees have as much as 12% more revenue. There's really interesting research that's showing they looked at counties that had trees and then lost them to emerald ash borer, controlled for a whole bunch of variables, and found significant increases in cardiovascular and pulmonary disease after the trees were lost. So there are all these other significant benefits that we're finding trees, and more importantly, green space in the urban environment in general have. So this is just a small way that we can currently value some of these things, but there's many other benefits that we just can't value nearly as easily.
Hey, Lee, at the FPSC, we had asked a question. We were at 30%. If there was a goal that we should achieve, I don't know if that's going to be. You are okay. I'll be.
Well, I wasn't going to mention it yet, but if you'd like to.
I was just curious.
Yeah.
It was an interesting conversation.
Yeah, a lot of communities we work with, that's usually a question, like, what should our tree canopy be? And it used to be, there was a general recommendation that was thrown out by a nonprofit, and they've since kind of backed off that. And for cities in the American Midwest, it was 40%. So Grand Rapids, for example, took that and adopted a 40% tree canopy goal. The communities I work with, I generally say the problem with that is that there's never any timeline devoted to that. And if you're going to adopt a goal, all goals should have a timeline. And so it's usually better to go, all right, we have 30% right now. There's lots of things going on in Ferndale, lots of street projects. You guys are catching up, working with the tree inventory data, development. It's usually maybe a good start to say no loss. For the next 5 years, we're going to stay at 30%. That might be a really reasonable goal to start with. And then if you can achieve that after 5 years, you bump it up. But it's really up to you to think about that. the report we identified, we did say what your potential canopy could be if you planted a lot of the empty areas like the grass or what have you. But obviously you're going to want sports fields, some people are going to want lawns, and you're going to plant all of that. So these are just pieces that balance into that. But usually I coach most communities for a starter, no net loss is a good place to go. Yeah.
Do you some benchmark sort of the region's air quality in terms of coming up with some of these ecosystem benefits? Our region around Detroit, Metro Detroit, is a non-attainment congestion mitigation air quality, improvement area, meaning that we have poor air quality, lower than what the federal standards outline. And so I was just wondering how this fits into that bigger, broader picture.
Yeah, that would need additional assessments.
Okay.
The models here don't really take that into account, but you could do calculations of what type of percentage you need to achieve certain.
Okay.
I mean that can be done, but it was not part of the study.
I get it.
Other questions so far? All right.
I have a question. Are you taking any questions from the audience?
How about after he's done? Okay.
Okay. I did want to point this out. This is part of what I talked about, potential tree canopy. So talking with the city of Ferndale, we were able to establish some priorities for where trees might be needed. A lot of those are based on stormwater improvement. So using the models that we have, we can basically help determine where trees can be planted that they would do the most good. Where they do the most good in terms of some of the city's priorities, but also in intercepting stormwater, improving air quality, et cetera. So we fed in, basically what we did is we took out all the areas that are pavement, took out all the areas that are currently trees, took out some of the areas we could identify that would probably never be planted, like sports fields, et cetera, and then we had a mosaic of potential planting areas. We could then add various soils data, stormwater data, bring in some of the proximity to pavement, et cetera. We could prioritize potential planting areas. So the red or orange areas are high priority planting locations, which means if you planted trees there, they would have significantly higher impacts than in some of the purple areas. Not to say all these areas should be planted or, you should absolutely only plant the high areas, but this is just a guideline to help the city think about, future planting or outreach efforts where those might have the most impact. So in general, the work we've done so far, and like we established at the beginning, we're not done yet. Some recommendations that I'm starting to see in my role here is one, start with the priority maintenance activities. We can cross this out. The city's already completed the priority maintenance activities. And then continue planting young trees and replace your mature trees as they die out. I mentioned there's a lot of mature trees. You're going to start to see some decline in those, so continue to replace those. I would also coach at this point, too, to think about how you're going to maintain your younger trees. Because if you prune trees when they're young and train them to grow straight rather than having dual branching or lots of lower branches that cars can run into, it's a lot cheaper to remove small branches than it is to remove larger branches. And you can handle that early as opposed to late. So young tree maintenance becomes very important, and yet most cities don't do any of it. I did put a couple recommendations in here for tree planting. We don't have to go through all of them here. Otherwise, complete your tree inventory and maintain the data. You're making an investment in this asset management system. So how are you going to continue to maintain that long term? Matt's already thinking about that and working on that. Consider your long-term canopy goals. We talked about this a little bit already. Do you want to strive for more canopy? Is there canopy in specific areas you'd like to see? Or do you want to just make sure you're having no net loss to start with? I would also start thinking about when you're going to remeasure your urban tree canopy assessment. You don't have to go through the full urban tree canopy assessment. There are cheaper, easier methods of getting just a general benchmark. So there's different ways of doing that, but it's something you're going to want to think about regularly if you have a goal. Review policies and practices. So how are your ordinances and such fitting into the various goals you want to meet? We did do an ordinance review as part of this project. So we've passed recommendations and suggestions onto the city to review and decide which of those they like, which of those may not fit with your goals, and make some final changes based on our experience. Engage residents. If you'll notice, when we looked at the entire tree canopy, there's only a small percentage that the city controls. A lot of the tree canopy is on private property. And so there's a lot of room to engage citizens and talk to citizens and outreach and education, why trees matter to Ferndale, why you like trees, why you want more trees, and even develop some programs around that to engage participation across the community. I would recommend, if that's something you're interested in doing, I would start with maybe a certain area of the city that's low tree canopy as a pilot project. Maybe think about a certain class of landowner as a pilot area, and think about how you might want to engage people, what message might resonate in your community. Locally, Macomb County is going through a lot of this right now. We recently completed some work with them and a lot of the communities in southern Macomb County. So there might be some learnings that, or even sharing opportunities between the various communities in these areas. And then the last one is we're going to do a management plan for you under our current contract. And what this will do is it will help establish city priorities for tree maintenance. So this will be on city property, help establish kind of a budget, what you need to think of the next 5 years. But there's also something called an urban forest plan or urban forest master plan. And this looks a little bit more at how do all the various partners, community members fit into the whole urban forest, not just what the city controls. That might be something you wish to consider, especially as you head down this path of expanding tree canopy across the community, not necessarily just on public land. So that's what I've got. You've asked a lot of questions so far.
I have a question.
Oh, we've got lots.
Okay. Go ahead. I just wanted to, regarding your talk about regarding engaging the residents. Now, just recently, well, I would say within the last maybe 4 or 5 months, I know that the schools had a tree fundraiser where they were certain trees you could purchase, but the thing is that I don't know if there was any sort of guidance as to where to plant the trees, et cetera. So I don't know where that went, and I don't know if they'll do it again, but it just kind of piqued my interest when you talked about engaging the residents. Maybe there's something that we can do to help them understand where they can go, and maybe they can work with the city to see where.
Absolutely.
I mean, because if I'm not mistaken, they were able to plant them where they wanted. So if they wanted it in another community, all they had to do was buy it. They would just, they would. So just, maybe it's just something to look at, because if we do it again, we'll need some.
Grand Rapids and Detroit both have very active citizen forester programs where they train residents on planting trees. Relief Michigan is a statewide nonprofit that does homeowner education classes in various communities. So they're another great resource to provide that training material. Grand Rapids right now has a big federal grant where they're planting trees on school properties throughout the city, and they're training the kids and giving them materials to take home on the importance of trees, how to plant trees, et cetera. So there's some other models in the state that would be very effective, especially with the schools. Okay. And schools is one of those where grants play very, very well for that type of work too.
Sharon, you had a question. Come on up, though, so that we can hear you at the mic.
Thank you. I was fascinated by how much money we can save by not running the water through the storm sewers. So, of course, it gets my brain thinking. It would be really wonderful now that we're developing our downtown so much that when we have new architects coming in with new building designs, to consider having the more sod or garden type rooftops and stuff to also do that. And is that considered part of this, or is it strictly trees, just canopy trees?
Yeah, our work was strictly in regards to trees. But as you start talking about green infrastructure and stormwater infrastructure, these are also many solutions that should be considered. So, where you might be able to think about other green space or maybe a tree is not appropriate. What I will say, in a lot of downtown environments, communities have 4x4 tree pits, which, I refer to as tree coffins. If you think about like a tree, compare it to a goldfish. If you put a goldfish in a small bowl, it's going to stay small. It's not going to, live forever. If you put it in a big pond, it's going to grow large and it's going to live a long time. Trees are kind of the same way. So soil volume becomes very important to growing trees for a long time and growing large trees. So, as you're talking about downtown beautification and things of that nature, there might be opportunities to think about your soil infrastructure different that accommodates green infrastructure and large trees. We've been helping Birmingham a little bit with this, but a great example is Ithaca, New York, which is a community of similar population, about 30,000, where they've done a whole lot of under sidewalk infrastructure to support large trees throughout that community.
May I have a comment and just a follow-up? One of the goals of the Ferndale Environmental Sustainability Commission was to really make sure that the city had a strong stormwater management green infrastructure, ethos, as well as a plan. And our next item on the agenda is about our master land use plan, and I don't know if that will include or hit on this topic, but that is really relevant to us enhancing what we do for stormwater management. And I think FESC has really been a driver as a resident, committee, making sure that we include that in our master land use plan. And so this assessment, I think, kicks us off in a really good direction to build on these ideas.
Yeah, it's something for you guys to pour into and use as guidance, and hopefully it helps. Oh, yeah.
Dan.
To follow up on that, this is really fascinating data, but it is only a quarter of the city. What's your time frame for the rest of it?
That's up to the city at this point. We would be happy to complete it this year if the city wanted, but we're under contract to complete it all in 2019.
So do you feel setting goals and in use to discussion on our master land is 25% is a responsible sample to set overall goals against?
So the street tree inventory is only a quarter section of the city, which we're going to complete over the next 3 years. The urban tree canopy assessment is the full city. So that where we looked at the tree canopy for both public and private land, that is the entire city.
Let me ask my question a little differently then. So if I wanted to set a goal for stormwater, because there's clearly an ROI to do so,
yes.
At what point in this process will I have enough data to comfortably set a goal and then to calculate a cost to get there?
You have that now through the urban tree canopy assessment.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Which quarter of the city?
They did the northeast
Northeast
quadrant.
Northeast quadrant. Okay.
Through the mayor, I
Yeah,
have
sure.
several.
Sure, Greg.
So you supplied us with several species suggestions. Most of them are large and moderate-sized trees. Is there any reason why you didn't choose or suggest smaller trees like American redbud or Muskogee crepe myrtles?
Yeah, largely because my recommendations on the list were also to, refrain from planting more maples and Callery pear particularly, and so those are a medium and a large size tree. So my recommendations fit with that.
Okay.
There are, crepe myrtles would not necessarily survive very well in this climate, but redbud is a great tree, for example. There's various crab apples, hawthorns, et cetera. There are smaller trees. In general, if you're having a goal towards tree canopy or the environmental benefits, the largest tree you can fit responsibly in a location, the better. But that is going to be dictated by the space you have between the sidewalk and the street, by various other infrastructure concerns like overhead lines, et cetera, and it is important to get that right.
Yeah, well, and that's kind of what I was going to get to with my next question, is that there's a lot of areas, because we're an urban community, there's a lot of areas where we're dealing with utility lines
Yes.
and very narrow spaces, so smaller trees actually work much better. We just redid Hilton Road, and it doesn't have any trees really, so you could plant a lot of smaller, hopefully flowering trees that add some color and some variety. Other question that I had was,
I'm sorry, Mayor. I have a follow-up question to your question, if that's okay, just
Sure.
to interject here, maybe it makes sense. So, Councilman Pollica talked about the work that we did recently, and there's many other moving parts and projects in the city right now. Does your plan and recommendations take into consideration things like mass transit, major projects that are going on in the city, and correlate that and look at the impact those projects are going to have to the current canopy?
No, it is currently a current assessment
It's
of what you
standalone
have.
assessment.
Yes.
Yeah. Snapshot.
Through the chair, if I may, been looking ahead, Dan, because this is one of the reasons I suggested we do the urban canopy assessment, because transit will have an impact down Woodward. And our DPW director pulled a tree inventory of all the trees in the median 2 years ago when we started talking about bus rapid transit. So that sort of launched the discussion, which led to the tree canopy assessment, so that when any construction happens for bus rapid transit, that we actually have this assessment data, goals and policies in place to address that.
And if I may clarify as well, the report and the assessment is just one piece of the deliverable from the urban tree canopy assessment. All of our GIS data is in the city's hands as well.
Mm-hmm.
So additional analyses and impacts could be looked at based on the tree canopy data that we provided.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Another question that I had was, as you know, we do have a large industrial area, and because it's easier maintenance, a lot of people have just concreted and asphalted over everything. Are there grants or incentives, federal or state-wise, that would encourage property owners to transform some of that concrete space into natural space, including, trees?
There are a variety of grants available to help reduce the impact of stormwater management in many different ways. A lot of those are often rated based on the cheapest solution for the maximum impact, right? And sometimes depaving can be very expensive. That said, the U.S. Forest Service in particular has become more and more interested in how do we expand tree canopy on private lands. And so there are grants that look at expanding tree canopy on what they call degraded sites, and that would qualify. Okay. So the big one there is called the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, and it comes up every year through the U.S. Forest Service for those purposes. A lot of communities use it just for standard tree planting, but there's no reason it couldn't be used to incentivize work on private property.
Okay. So I guess my question comes or inquiry comes to council. Is there opportunity when we use Oprah and brownfields to encourage those people to utilize some of those green space? Right now, we don't say if you're going to apply for this, you need to have X amount of green space. Is that an opportunity for us?
I just wanted to mention that the City of Detroit Water Sewage Department is actually putting a fee on their drainage costs to help promote green infrastructure at scale. So this is a new program that they're exploring to help encourage private property owners to do green infrastructure stormwater management on their own properties. So the more impervious property you have, the higher your drainage fee would be because you're putting more water into the system. That's happening in a neighboring community.
We'll be taking a lot of this information and forming new ordinances and policies that will help support the information that we provided. So definitely as we go through the MLUP and our strategic plan, that will be part of the conversation as well.
Through the chair, if I may, do we have a time frame we want to get all that done by? The new ordinances to bring to council?
Oh, well, there'll be a few that are actually being reviewed right now by DPW. Okay. The other thing that we want to get going before the spring planting season is right now we currently actually have a tree planting program for our residents, and one of the things that they were able to supply was the ability to have new lists that will help us with the type of tree that we want planted. So we'll be hopefully getting that ready to go so we can kick that off in spring at prime planting season as well.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Good. Any other questions or comments?
Good stuff.
Well, even without signs, very interesting.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, Lee. Appreciate it. All right. Our next presentation is the master plan update. Jordan is going to lead that discussion.
Oops. The chief wanted me to let everyone know he was really excited about this presentation. So I don't have any fancy science, but basically what we have here today for you is just a very brief update on where the master plan is, where what are the next steps, and just kind of a refresher on what it contains to kind of give you that focus, because you've seen it before. It's been a planning commission, and we're moving toward the phase of getting this thing adopted and getting it to work. So just a quick update just to kind of go through. If you kind of recall what's different this time as opposed to the one we did in 2008, implementation is a key focus. This, by comparison to the 2008 plan, it's really a punch list. And essentially that's organized by several categories, which I'll talk about in a second. Another thing that's a little different this time is we drill down from, you sort of look at the aggregated entire city, and we also look at defined sub-districts that have unique characteristics, unique attributes that are worthy of paying attention to, and also different needs, challenges, opportunities. Two of the prominent ones being downtown, of course, and then our industrial district. Another thing that's different this time is a strong wealth of data that backs up all of our different recommendations, our different actions. So you can see we did some market studies for those district areas, and you can see, what kind of residential can we bear, what kind of office can we bear, retail. So sort of planning for growth, getting our heads wrapped around, where the city is going and how it's growing. So you can see some of the numbers up there. Again, kind of really drilling into, what kind of population growth can we be looking at, and who are the folks that we should be looking at that are, families that are be growing, younger singles and couples. A lot of folks from within the city already are going to be looking at different housing types. A big number here is 935 units over the next 5 years in both sub-districts. It's a lot of housing. So just talking about where that's going to go and how we're going to manage it. Again, just kind of looking at labor growth, different categories of employment that we can be looking at. Again, all just helping us provide a strategic focus in terms of the types of people, the types of jobs that are going to be growing in our region. And again, just types of stores that we can attract. The DDA is looking really closely at our retail recruitment. So this is the kind of stores that we could be looking at. What are the stores that we don't have a lot of right now that we could support in our market area here? Restaurants, et cetera, kind of laid out. Kind of the nuts and bolts of the plan. You can see each chapter kind of contains introduction and existing conditions, sort of setting the context for that category, and then more importantly, equally importantly, some goals and actions that are tied to sort of, here's the context of this issue, whether it's land use or neighborhoods. What are the goals that we want to achieve in this plan, and then drilling down on what are the actions that we are going to take as staff and electeds to achieve those goals. And again, just also filtering in community quotes, community preferences, kind of, again, adding depth to the context of where the heck did we get all these recommendations and how was this plan formed. A really strong foundation there, which is a great segue to this slide. Sustainability, you could see sort of the six categories that or buckets, if you will. You can't quite see them too well on the screen there, but the categories in which our actions are going to fall, our strategic priorities. So you've got land use, housing and neighborhoods, economic vitality, recreation and open space, transportation and mobility, city services, facilities. Nothing majorly surprising. These are all sort of common categories that are important to cities. But what's really setting us apart, I think, in terms of our plan is how sustainability is woven through each one of those elements. So it's a foundational piece to the plan. Each one of those categories and the actions within them speaks to sustainability. So looking at the time frame, once adopted, you have this sort of broken into 3 or 4 groups here, now, near, and next. So now, sort of as it implies, as soon as the plan is adopted, these are the first things that you're going after. The near term, you're thinking about it, but this is the stuff that you're going to be getting ready to tackle in 1 to 2 years from adoption. And next is sort of the near to long term. You're starting to think about the next iteration of this plan and different tasks that you'll tackle down the road. And then you'll have, of course, some that are ongoing, that are just happening over the course. So the action plan, again, this is the meat of the plan. There are 112 total actions, quite a few of them tied to my department, which that's going to be fun. But you can see the top graph there is sort of how they're broken up, distribution by category. Again, this plan is really organized in the way it gets you thinking about the different things that we're going to tackle. So it breaks down that huge chunk of actions into manageable chunks and really helps the team on the staff side focus our efforts as well. And you can see a big chunk of them are in the now category, but most of them are in that sort of 1 to 2 year phase. So a lot of this plan is going to be adopting, gearing up, things like ordinance, really preparing us for that near phase. A big part of this plan was community input. You can see all the different stats that we threw up here. You had the Ferndale Exchange with 35 polls and open-ended questions, 40,000 views, 260 responses on social media, 120 plus visitors to our public open houses. We had more than 5 bi-monthly meetings with our, there's an advisory committee that's sort of shepherding this plan along, and then focus groups. You heard about some of them earlier today, the Ferndale Environmental Sustainability Committee, the Parks and Recreation Committee, a senior group, corridor-based groups, and then, of course, the Downtown Parking Task Force, who you're going to hear some news from them a little later today. So you can see just really, really strong community engagement on this as well. And sort of the meat of it tonight, that is a really small slide up there. So timeline and action steps. The goal is to be transparent, but that is tiny font. So I'll read that to you really quickly. So the first sort of stop on the train to implementation is tonight. That says approval by council for public review distribution. The Planning Commission is actually the body that legally adopts the plan. This is more of a, you've seen this plan before. This is sort of you kind of looking at this and giving us sort of your go-ahead to give us the public review window, which is a 63-day period where our neighboring communities get to look at the plan, provide comment, etc. So on the 27th of October, we're going to post that. So although we haven't gotten any formal comments that haven't been addressed yet, if you think of something crucial in those last 3 days, get that to us, and we'll make sure it's incorporated before we post on the 27th. That draft review period ends on December 30th, 2016. There will be a period where our staff team and our consultants will review the comments that are submitted that week of January 2nd. The Planning Commission tentatively will receive this for adoption via a public hearing on January 18th. and City Council will be given an opportunity to affirm that plan, the recommendation of the Planning Commission, on the 23rd of January. And that's, if there's time kind of built in there, that's sort of the if you're an Oregon Trail fan, that's the grueling pace. But if there are comments, concerns, things along the way, we've got to stop and shoot some bison, So we like to have some fun up here. I've got jokes. I don't have signs. So but that's sort of our aggressive timetable, and we think it's a pretty ambitious one. This plan has been in the oven for a few years now. We want to get this over the hump for you. We're really excited about it, and you've had sort of departmental-wide input throughout the city, too. So that's the plan in general. Tonight's presentation, again, was just to kind of frame that conversation, say this is where we're going, this is the game plan for implementation. With that, happy to take any questions that you do have about it.
Just a clarification of terms, because seeing it this way is very helpful. The Planning Commission adopts it, we affirm it. We're not normally an affirming body, we're usually an adopting body. From a legal perspective, from a technical perspective, are they the adopting body? And
that's correct. Yeah. But we felt, just in the spirit of the way this plan has been done, we felt it was important that this plan come before council, and the council does sort of in a formal way say that, yes, this is our master plan, we're all about this, we support it moving forward. So yes, the Planning Commission does legally adopt it. It's a planning document. Okay. But it's just, in terms of having all hands in, we thought that was an important step.
Trying to keep council in the loop as much as possible so there's no surprises is really what we're doing here, actually. And we've been keeping you pretty well posted, but before that it starts the process of 3 days? Is that what we're?
That's right. The 27th would be our target to begin that review period.
Right. We wanted to make sure you had one more stab at it to make sure there wasn't any major concerns, and you guys have been keeping us posted as well on anything that you have. So.
Yeah. And for folks that want to view the plan, where do they do that?
So we'll be posting it online. We'll be posting links in social media. We'll have a dedicated space on the website for it. So it'll be accessible online. We'll have copies in the office if you want to come in and actually touch it and feel it and look through it. But it'll basically be online. We're going to be pushing pretty hard.
Okay. And what's the time frame for that? Just curious, because this is a fairly aggressive timeline.
Oh,
we'll be doing that shortly?
That's right. So it'll be posted for distribution by the 27th.
Gotcha.
And then so you have this 63 days that it's sort of a legal requirement, but of course during that window, residents, citizens can look at it as well.
Yep. Thank you. Other questions or comments? All right. Thanks for the update. Cool. Appreciate it. Well, bring signs next time.
That's right.
All right. And our final presentation this evening is our Downtown Development Authority. Barry Hicks, thanks for sticking with us, although I think you're probably maybe sticking around for another one too. But what's going on in the downtown?
All right, well, good evening. First of all, I guess just to piggyback on some of those comments from the Master Land Use Plan, I wanted to thank Jordan and Justin for being so inclusive with the DDA and getting our feedback and everything on that. It's been a real joy to work with both of them throughout it. So I don't have any signs or anything like that either, or any awards, but I do have some fun events to talk about. But before we get to that, later you're going to see a presentation about the parking deck. I've heard a lot of comments about this over the past year. I just want to thank a lot of our volunteers who are business owners and community leaders in the downtown area and in Ferndale for participating tons of their time to this over the past year. I just want to recognize Dean Bach, Jackie Smith, PJ Jacokes, Brian Siegel, Tiffany Best, Jim Poole, and Tom Perlman for dedicating that time and effort and looking at all the numbers and all the studying and everything else that's gone into that. So I'm not going to comment too much more on that. I will say on October 13th, the DDA Board of Directors unanimously passed a resolution supporting the Parking Committee's recommendation. You'll see that in your council packet. And also I'd like to say to everyone in the audience and everybody that might be watching, because I've heard some of these comments, that the recommendation before you is just to consider kind of the idea of this specific location. And I know people have been getting caught up with what it's going to look like, and is it going to be mixed use, is it going to be residential? We don't really know the answer to that quite yet. We have some concepts and some ideas, so I think it's really important to kind of keep that in mind. We fully intend on engaging the community. The DDA and the city have already started talking about working together on those things. And I know I saw Carrie here earlier. Hi, Carrie. To talk about community engagement and everything. So you'll get a little bit more info on that later. I'd also like to invite everybody on council to a kind of special DDA board meeting that's coming up on Thursday, November 10th at 8 a.m. if you haven't already received an invitation, though I think you have. At that meeting, we will be joined by Matt Wagner from the National Main Street. He has over 20 years of experience revitalizing downtown and attracting new businesses. Currently is analyzing data from a retail survey completed by the DDA in 2013 and a market analysis completed by the city in 2015, actually about a year ago this month, I believe. His analysis will provide some insight into some of what those numbers mean, also some recommendations as to the types of retailers that we should be attracting. I want to thank Oakland County for giving us a $5,000 tech grant to make that possible, to have Matt come in, do this analysis and everything. So it cost us nothing, which was great.
Our favorite
Thank you to our partners.
Right?
So yeah, that'll be really good information. I think it'll be a little bit different than what we've seen from some of our other market analysis and studies. So again, November 10th, 8 a.m. right here in council chambers. Coming up on Saturday, let's get into the events, more of the fun stuff here. Saturday, October 29th, this weekend from 4 to 7 p.m., there will be the bring your Halloween costumes and get ready to come down, go trick-or-treating downtown. This is the 7th annual downtown trick-or-treat event being brought to you by the Boston Tea Room at 224 West 9 Mile. Come on down, bring the kids at heart, and just enjoy the downtown businesses and going trick-or-treating. Coming up later, and Saturday, November 26th, we have Small Business Saturday, and our tree lighting is that day. Small Business Saturday is brought to us by American Express and encourages holiday shoppers to patronize brick-and-mortar businesses that are small and local. We have such things as Black Friday and Cyber Monday that encourage your patronage at big box retailers and online stores, but don't forget to check out your local retailers and their selection right here in downtown Ferndale. Also stick around that evening for the tree lighting entertainment to be announced. And then also, one other thing I wanted to announce about that, again, our partners at Oakland County have been putting together a Small Business Saturday program that's countywide. Businesses in Ferndale are encouraged to participate. Some have signed up, more are signing up every day. Basically what it is if you come and shop downtown at a participating business and you text the word shop to 41411, you will receive a link to a quick registration page where you take a photo of your receipt and send it in to prove that you shop downtown. You'll be entered to potentially win a first prize of $5,000, a second prize of $2,000, or a third prize of a $500 voucher through Southwest Airlines for travel anywhere. And the businesses can sign up at advantageoakland.com/shop small if they're interested in doing that. And again, as a customer, you just have to come downtown.
Great incentive to shop local.
Yep. Next thing we have, getting on your calendar for Saturday, December 10th. It's almost the holiday season again here, and we have the annual Holiday Ice Festival returning. There will be over 50 ice sculptures, live ice sculpting, carving, and demonstrations, hay rides, and the opportunity to meet Santa and his reindeer. So don't forget to check out the local businesses at that time as well. And then soon thereafter, for the third Thursday in December, there is Merry Moonlight Madness, where some of our retailers are staying open a little later that night for some of your last-minute Christmas gifts and that sort of thing. And then I also wanted to announce for one of our partners at the Ferndale Area Chamber of Commerce, their 2016 gala is coming up on Thursday, November 10th at 6 p.m. So get that on your calendar, and then more information will be coming on through their social media outlets on Facebook. And those are the announcements. Thank you.
Excellent. Anyone have any questions for Barry? Thank you, Barry. Appreciate it. So that concludes our presentations this evening. Thanks for everybody for bearing with us. They were a little longer than usual, but we have some interesting stuff going on in town. But our next agenda item would be the consent agenda, and those are items that council considers routine and we enact in one motion unless somebody on council removes one of those items. So let me read that for you now. Item A is the approval of the minutes of the regular meeting held October 10th, 2016. Item B is the approval to adopt Amendment 7 to Council's Rules of Procedure, Section 2, Meeting Procedure, to change the agenda order to place call to audience after presentations, as noticed at the October 10, 2016 regular council meeting. Item C is the approval of the special event permit for the Holiday Ice Festival on Saturday, December 10th, as Barry just mentioned, as detailed in the special event director's summary, to reflect the consensus of the special event committee, contingent upon the listed conditions. Item D, they're fighting over candy up here, if that's what you're wondering. That's all good. Item D is the approval of the revised council resolution approving the obsolete property rehabilitation exemption certificate application, all European auto, as submitted by our Community and Economic Development Director. Item E is the approval of the purchase and installation of the Avigalon Security Solution by DA Central in the amount of $18,935 from the account listed in your packet. Item F is the approval to adopt resolutions of support for a coalition for transit and citizens for connecting our communities. Vote yes for regional transit, as submitted by Mayor Pro Tem Piana, and I wouldn't doubt she might say something about that later on. And item G is the approval of the bills and payroll as submitted by the city manager's office, subject to review by the Council Finance Committee. What is council's pleasure on the consent agenda this evening?
I move that we accept the consent agenda as presented.
Support.
It has been moved by Leaks May and supported by Martin. Any discussion on the consent agenda? Anyone from council with discussion on the consent agenda? All right, Marnie, would you call the roll, please?
Council members Polika?
Yes.
Hannah?
Yes.
Leaks May?
Yes.
Martin?
Yes.
And Mayor Coulter?
Yes, thank you. The consent agenda is adopted. Moving on now to our regular agenda. Item A is the consideration of the Downtown Parking Committee site recommendation. I believe you all have a packet of information in your packets that you were given. Let me just, and Barry mentioned some of the things that I wanted to preface this with, but let me just give a little bit of background and history as to how we got to this point, because last fall, in an effort, really a joint effort between the city and the DDA to sort of figure out what we're going to do about addressing our parking capacity issues after the conclusion of the last project. The chair of the DDA and I decided to co-chair a parking recommendation committee that was made up of downtown stakeholders, business owners, resident, to help inform our decision in terms of two questions. And we asked them really just two questions only. Number one, where would we put a parking deck? Literally, what site should we choose? And second, what kind of a project would you recommend us doing? And so that's what they looked at. And what started out as a fairly simple question ended up. They really took this on. And Barry mentioned the people's names that were on that committee. I'm going to read them one more time because I just really appreciate the amount of work and studying and reading reports and reading parking recommendation reports and reading retail reports and reading all of the sort of reports and the discussions that they had. It took them longer than I expected, and so I was always apologizing to them for how long it was taking. But in the end, I think they did a really thorough job. And so again, Dean Bach, who owns Dino's and Embrew and is also the chair of the DDA, Tom Perlman, who's a major business property owner in the downtown area, PJ Jacote, who owns Go Comedy over here, Jackie Smith, who's a retail business owner on the west side, also a DDA board member, Jim Poole, who is our sort of resident voice. He's also happens to be a pastor at Renaissance Vineyard. Brian Siegel, who is representing sort of restaurant owners. He owns the local kitchen. And then Tiffany Best, who her and her husband own the Rust Belt Market. So this was the group that met over many months studying this, and I really do appreciate their recommendation. We're going to hear a lot more detail from Joe about that. But then, as Barry mentioned, the next step then was to take this to the DDA board, which is made up of an even broader group of people representing various aspects of our downtown on both east and west and retail and restaurant and all of that. And really our goal here was very simple. For me, if there was one lesson that there were a lot of lessons that we learned in the previous project, but one of them was that we needed to be more inclusive, that we needed to have all the stakeholders at the table, I've used this phrase a number of times in the last few years, but I'll use it again. I really took to heart the notion that if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And we decided that we were going to do this together. We're going to do it with our downtown business owners. We're going to do it with our DDA. We're going to do it with and resident input as well. And you're going to hear that there's a very robust component for resident input in this plan. And so all that being said is we are here now tonight because they have made a recommendation. They actually made this recommendation in the spring, but we had to modify it because their recommendation was, well, frankly, unaffordable. So given the financial constraints of the city, we went back and worked with that group and the DDA again to modify that recommendation to something that was both affordable but would also address our immediate parking needs in the city. So with that is how we got to today and the recommendation of the parking committee and the DDA, right? Did I miss anything, Joe?
You got it.
All right.
Summary.
So yes.
Before you
No
go
sign
further,
needed.
just for clarification, there's 2 agenda items on this topic. Could we get a quick explanation for everybody what the difference is between the 2 items and why we have to have 2 different conversations?
And I'll let Joe
Yeah.
address
The
it.
first
Yep.
agenda is really just us presenting to you the conclusion or the result of that long process set forth by the Downtown Parking Committee. So which is really just approving the site recommendation. This is the place where we would locate a parking deck if we were to build a parking deck. The second one is, should that be approved, we would have to agree to begin funding for the next steps, which would really heavily involve public engagement, predominantly public engagement process, as well as beginning to take that into schematic design, which we'll talk about as part of the presentation.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So with that, Joe Gauchow is really our staff person. He's our assistant city manager, but he's really the person on staff that took the lead in managing this project along with our friends at the DDA. And so Joe has learned more about parking and parking decks than you probably ever thought you would when you took this job. But
live it and dream it. So that was a great introduction, Mayor. And so
he has to say that, though. He works for me. So
tonight's presentation is really focused on just providing you a good snapshot of the synopsis of how we've gotten to the recommendation from the Parking Committee, and what goes into that recommendation, and what the next steps might look like.
Yeah. Thanks.
So let's start with a great place to begin with anything, and that's beginning with what you know. So let me walk you through these quick points so we can just frame the process as it was framed at the beginning and as we will continue to commit to. The first point says we will meet the parking supply needs for our downtown businesses. It's a common perception that the city has a parking supply issue, and so a parking deck has been a considered option for quite some time now. And so that is certainly one thing that we know at the outset. We will meet the supply issues in our downtown concerning parking. Number 2, when we do that, we will seek to minimize disrupting our local business during construction. So that's going to speak to a really intense parking mitigation plan and communications plan and public engagement plan should the project move forward. Number 3, we understand certainly and seek to minimize the impact of any parking deck height upon the residents in the adjacent neighborhoods. All 3 locations that were recommended by the Parking Committee border residential neighborhoods, as does our downtown. So one known that we will move forward with is we will seek to minimize that impact, and that will consider all design elements. 4, we will create a sense of place for the public. We know that at the outset, we understand that the expectation in this community is not to just build a concrete parking deck to house cars temporarily. This will be a place to celebrate our public and our community, and it will certainly incorporate those values into the deck and location. 5, we desire to provide a buffer for our residents adjacent to the parking lot. That really, again, speaks to number 3, but we think that it's important to emphasize that we acknowledge the impact that development has in our downtown and on the footprint of the community. So again, underscoring that, we will seek to provide a buffer where we can for those residents. And 6, we desire a vibrant street that's active with complementary retailers. Some of our MLUP results really suggest that we have a lot of residential and commercial activity that could be coming down the pipeline. So we seek to add to that positively.
And if I could add there, and I won't interrupt you very often, but I hear this question a lot, and I just want to make people aware. We studied the current public city-owned parking lots that the city owns. We did that very deliberately. I hear, and you've probably all heard, why didn't you just buy Save-A-Lot and build it there? Or why didn't you just buy that? There's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, those are cost prohibitive. The Save-A-Lot project that piece of property was very expensive. These properties don't cost us anything. So the financial aspect of it was important. But there is an additional reason as well, and that is when we're developing and we're the developer of our own property, we can develop exactly how we want it to be. When we're working on private land, if we had done this with a public-private partnership, for instance, like we had talked about in the past, you give up some of that control and some of that ability to dictate the project. So for a couple of very important reasons, we focused our site selection on the current city property lots that we currently have. Make sense?
Now, acknowledging these no's certainly speak to the importance of control, of keeping as much control as we can of the process. So next, I just want to identify or acknowledge the guiding principles that they set forth upon us before we pursued the evaluation of the 3 sites that they recommended us looking into. One, address the current and future parking needs for the downtown, a very basic goal that this site should meet. 2, the city should increase capacity on the east side, if possible, and the west side, serving both sides of our downtown. And then focusing on a strategy to minimize the business disruptions. Again, what can we do to help mitigate any disruption to our local business so we continue to support our small businesses and help them grow throughout the process? You'll notice on the right, we just identified a snapshot of the sites that were recommended to pursue by the Downtown Parking Committee. One site on the right, working from the right to the left, is known as Lot 11. That is right next to City Hall. Sites 9 and 10 were considered a combination site that we would evaluate that abuts Woodward on the east side. And then Site 6 is the West Troy lot, which abuts Allen and West Troy Avenue intersection. All surface lots owned by the city. Right off the bat, you'll see that 9 and 10, before we spent a lot of money investigating the potential for the sites, we did walk each site, and it was deemed that it would be cost prohibitive due to the challenge of connecting the 2 lots to get the capacity we wanted, as well as we didn't think we could get the capacity. We didn't meet that very first goal, which is meeting the supply needs of the downtown. So once those were removed, we focused our efforts on Lot 6 and Lot 11, and the investments that went with that were the geotechnical testings. We did have to do a soil test for each site to help understand the soil composition, as well as do an environmental study of each site, a very cursory phase 1 environmental, and then begin to look at the dimensions of the site and to see what kind of parking efficiency we could get out of each site. And what I mean by parking efficiency is, can we achieve the number of sites, the number of parking spaces that we wanted to add at each site? We look at that, and the geometry of each site has a lot to do with that. So now I'm going to move forward into just a high-level overview of each concept with Lot 11 and Lot 6. So for the public, Lot 11 is the City Hall lot, adjacent to City Hall. And I'm going to introduce Carl Walker to just give an overview on some of the engineering schematics that we're presenting right here. Really, this just is going to show you how many levels it would take to get our parking numbers that we want on each site. And so with that, Mike Ortley from Carl Walker.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Okay, good. Well, as Joe indicated, we were tasked with analyzing the 4 different sites, and we quickly came to zero in on 11 and 6. And part of that process is the suitability of the sites for parking, which there's some specific characteristics that would make a good parking structure, but also we wanted to understand what's going on underneath the ground, as well as the site dimensions, but also the some of the other aspects of the site with potential development. I mean, what are the that would go with a parking structure? What type of things could you do on the site? Anyways, with Site 11, we quickly found out that to meet the requirements or the recommendations of the committee, we had to have 5 levels of parking. The site, as shown, is up against both the library and City Hall, so we had to take that into account as well. And that did limit somewhat the dimensions of the site. So to create some opportunity area along 9 Mile, we set aside 60 feet of space for some future development or basically an opportunity area. And we identified this 5-level parking structure, which falls in basically the height limits in that area. Well, I was going to say, as you can see, but as I can see, there's 361 spaces is what we identified, and that netted out 250, 260 spaces. What we show there as far as a square foot per space, the cost to build a parking structure there's a lot of elements, including the subsoil conditions, the appearance, and also just the amount of square footage you have to build per space that you achieve, similar to if you build a house. So that's one of the things we looked at pretty carefully. Some of the advantages we had identified, that if you build on the east side, you're certainly less impact on the west side during construction. However, as you look at the disadvantages, it's just the opposite, is you're not putting the parking where you really need it. So looking at Site 6, this is an isometric or a 3D, and hopefully you can see that, but it shows a 4-level structure. Because of the site dimensions, we were able to get more parking spaces in fewer levels, which is one of the advantages of this site, as well as we were able to set aside some buffer area along Allen Street. And I'll have Dan talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So what we saw there is some of the advantages is that certainly it met the direct demand. It put parking where it was needed. It also provided ample space for other uses, particularly the buffer along the west side. And certain other things came up during that review in terms of the use of Troy Street. Could that have some type of public amenity as well? There we go.
So just to sum that up into a more colorful slide, looking at the parking capacity, looking at the bar chart on the left and the bar on the right, you see the left represents the Lot 6, the West Troy lot, and the one on the right represents Lot 11. You'll see that the existing supply at Lot 6 is 138 spaces right now. Right now at peak demand, we have about 167, so we are actually over 100% capacity at peak demand on Lot 6. If we were to build the 4 layers, we would hit 389 as the net total number of parking spaces. On the right side, you have 96 existing at the City Hall lot. You would have to go 5 levels up, so an additional level up in order to achieve the parking numbers. And you would have a total of 361 spaces, which is just about 30 fewer spaces on Lot 11 versus 6. And again, the section on the right really just talks about geometry, and it really is as simple as geometry. Lot 6 is much more broad. It's a rectangle, so we can compress the parking into fewer levels in order to still net out where we wanted to net out in terms of adding to the supply. And then Lot 11 is that compressed square where we just lose a little bit more space and opportunity. So it's a bit more restricted, and we're going to have to go up higher in order to get the numbers that we want to get. Cost implications that we would expect that to average about add on $1,500 to $2,000 more to build per space to build on the City Hall lot versus the West Troy lot. So there's a financial consideration there for certain. And that segues nicely into the next picture. So administratively, while all this research was going on by our parking consultants, Carl Walker, administratively, we had to find out what our bond capacity actually is. Initially, let's recap, the parking committee wanted us to pursue both the east side and the west side, largely because that would have been a really big step for parking mitigation, right? So during any construction on the east side, you would have the west side to help the other side out, vice versa. So in doing so, we sought meetings with our bonding attorneys, and we did identify that we are capped right now at $15 million in bond. That means that the city could request enough debt up to $15 million, no more. We would max out the city's credit card. And really, both of these structures to construct this number of spaces are going to be between 12 to 14 million, up to 15 million. We certainly would expect that in the ballpark, and I think Carl Walker agreed with that. So what we did is we asked them to run some numbers and give us a snapshot picture of what that would look like over a 20-year term, and that's our annual payment represented on the left side. So what does that mean? How does that impact us? The net effect is that we are going to be limited to one development if we pursue a parking development downtown. And if so, if you are making a decision in a vacuum and you cannot choose two decks, which site location would you have to choose? So the numbers will be a factor in choosing that. So we just listed development factors for the city to consider as we pursue development is construction costs, obviously, and we've identified already that 6 would be a less expensive deck to build than the City Hall lot. The future tax-based possibilities. So we do have an understanding that, again, the geometry does play a factor here, as well as the existing density of businesses already, that the site's more attractive for future office investment and future commercial investment. So when we talk about what kind of future tax base is possible to build off of this parking development, that's a factor as well financially. And thirdly, economic durability, which we're going to talk about next. To talk a little bit about economic durability, the city reached out to Gibbs Planning. Gibbs Planning did a retail study for the city of Ferndale that Barry had referenced earlier. And Gibbs Planning, when looking at the two sites, did acknowledge that each site has a lot of development potential, that there's a lot of development interest in the city of Ferndale, period. And I think the master land use plan results speak to that. But Gibbs focused when, again, making a decision to vacuum. If you look at the two sites, the west side, his number one factor is that the West Troy lot is considered more economically durable. And what we mean by that is there is existing commercial density to take advantage of. So you're adding supply to support your existing density on West Troy. If you were to build on City Hall, we'd be creating new space opportunities, which is a good thing, but in a period of economic downturn, if one were to occur, as they expect, they're cyclical every 10 years. So we look forward to 2018 and 2019, you have existing commercial density to really leverage and benefit from as you add to the capacity. And on that, you could say that we have decent times going right now economically across the nation. And right now, if there's a high entertainment demand, there's greater parking tolerance. So that means if you have more disposable income right now, and times are a little bit better, guests coming to downtown are a little bit more tolerant about not finding parking, and they'll still stay, commit their dollars, and spend their night downtown as they intended. In times of economic downturn, if you don't have that disposable income, or if that income is dropped at all, any pain might be a mitigating factor in your decision to come downtown and spend your money downtown in Ferndale. But the good news is with a parking capacity addition, you would reduce that mitigating factor, and they might still be willing to have that tolerance and spend their money downtown on our commercial retailers. Gibbs, other concurrent considerations, he talked about implementing concentric parking principles. So again, when you build a deck, you want to drive your longtime users to use the deck. When I say long time, your all-day users, your 5 to 8 hour sessions, get them off the street and keep those street spaces open to support our commercial retailers. So he really advises to consider looking toward concentric parking principles. And then, again, focusing attraction on office and commercial density, shifting the parking demand. We talked about peak hour demand. Right now it's at night. But adding that office into the downtown would shift that demand theoretically toward the day. Which is something we certainly would welcome. So let's stop right there and talk about reducing business disruption. That was one of the nodes that I want to come back to. Right off the bat, we knew that we would have to do that to support our businesses. So immediately, administratively, we began to seek out partnership opportunities with Credit Union One. We know that they already have an existing deck in our downtown. It's just the next block over from us, so we reached out to them. And I'm happy to say that we are in the negotiation process with Credit Union One, but we're in a good place right now. This enabling the use of the Credit Union One parking deck to our guests of our downtown and our downtown employees would immediately add 221 parking spaces net to our downtown. So there's no construction, waiting for construction, and we are immediately adding the 221 spaces, which should be fantastic. That alone in itself isn't enough, and we understand that. So below that, you see that we recognize that there's still needs that we need to meet after that. We need to promote that. We need to work with our DDA and incorporate that site into a parking mitigation plan. We need to incorporate wayfinding because we know that that site might not be visible along 9 miles, so we need to make sure that it is visible and that it is usable. And we're even looking at a shuttle service program. We visited our folks at the downtown Rochester, and they were great. They gave us a great tour. They just built 2 decks into their downtown, which does border some residential neighborhoods, so we got some great tips from them. But one of those included the importance of a shuttle service program and how important that was to offer that to guests of the downtown and downtown employees. With that, so with the financial considerations, the ability to address the acute parking problem, and the opinions, the development opinions from Gibbs Planning, we shifted our efforts into focusing what potential there could be on Lot 6 and really focused on developing the parking there. So with that, I'm going to invite our Dan Mooney from FS&P, which is a local Ferndale architectural firm. They are part of our parking consultant team that we did go out for RFQ for last spring. And he'll comment a little bit about just the site footprint. This is very highly conceptual. I really want to emphasize that enough. We'll speak to how this fleshes out, if it fleshes out, how after Dan walks you through this. But this is really just a concept of what could be, again, focusing on the geometry of the space.
Excellent.
Thanks, Joe.
Hey, Dan.
Good evening, everyone. Would it be too much of a disruption to dim the lights up front? We might be able to see that slide just a little bit better.
Yep.
And,
yep, good idea.
Okay. So as Joe mentioned, my name is Dan Mooney. I'm from Fusco, Schaefer, and Pappas, right down the road on 9 Mile. We're at 550 9 Mile, and been in the community for a couple of years, and we really like our home here, and we're settling in really nicely. So as we focus on Lot 6 for a minute, and we'll look at that a little bit more, I wanted to speak just a minute about the tenets of really good parking structures in an urban area. So we've decided that we want more parking downtown, and it will present certain things that can be successful or not successful. And the most successful parking structures almost in an urban area almost always include some sort of mixed use, and the mixed use is important to create a vibrant community, to create a pedestrian experience that will make it pleasing to be around, and to design on a human scale to really have that pedestrian experience work for you as you travel in the area. And as an architect, I'll always say this: good design matters. If you want to reduce the user threshold, that is, if you want people to actually come into the deck, it needs to be inviting, it needs to be safe, and it needs to be secure. And in the fabric of Ferndale, we want to maintain the urban center. And so we want to create a sense of place. And this is common whether you're building anywhere in the United States or right here in our backyard. And very first and foremost, we want to be good neighbors to everyone that's around us. And in this instance, if we look at the existing parking lot right now, I think there's many ways in and there's many ways out. And many of those ways are through the alley and off of Troy. And a new parking structure in this location would almost certainly enter off of Troy. Boy, my hand is shaking really good. So coming in off of Troy would reduce the traffic in the alley, and As part of the plan, we could beautify the alley. We could make the alley, we talked a little bit about sustainable design earlier, and green alleys. These are things that we could take and certainly will take into consideration. And then along, which was it? Whoop, backwards. There we go. Along Allen Street, there's certainly an opportunity. We did not maximize the design of the parking structure. If we went end to end and side to side, we could have gotten more parking spaces. The one thing we do know is that it would be 4 stories of structured parking. Whether we went end to end or side to side, we were not going to be able to make it work in 3. So with the idea of 4 stories of structured parking, we look at a buffer along the junction of Allen Street, and we'll provide a nice buffer to the neighbors. We'll talk about that as we move forward with our public participation. And then along Troy Street, we've got a very, very active, almost second front door to the businesses. I know when I come down here and park here, it's just normal to come in the back door. It's like 2 front doors for all of the businesses back there. And if we were to add an active street front pedestrian experience with some commercial space, that might augment what happens. We've started to generate some interest. We've created the opportunity to create that sense of place. And if you look at it a little bit differently, and maybe you cut off the parking here, and you cut off the parking here, or the drive aisles of the street, and enter the parking deck and exit the parking deck, maybe you've got an opportunity to have a place for some public plaza, an events plaza. That could be something that could be really exciting in this area. I know that's something that I think I said our business is on 9 Mile, and I don't know how many times I came down 9 Mile and had to reroute to go around something because there's so many wonderful events at 9 Mile. It gets closed off every once in a while. So that's a little bit about parking decks wherever you would put them. So we don't have preconceived notions, but we have good design practices, and we will look to inject those good design practices throughout the process. I believe that's everything I was going to say.
Great.
I'm sorry, Dan, while you're still there, could you talk, and again, we're not into design phase at this point, but when you're talking broadly about design concepts, doing something adjacent to a residential area, which almost any lot we chose would have to be.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the, again, not specific to this site or any, but what are some of the potential design concept, ways that you can use design to mitigate the location?
Well, certainly we talked about 4 stories in height, and there are ways to mitigate how that feels. We don't have to build right up to the lot line all the way up for those floors. Certainly the face that you present to the neighbors is important to mitigate noise, to mitigate unwanted activity, and to maybe just make the alley a pleasing place to be as part of this development. Those are just some of the ways. Good lighting is going to be something of concern there. And I look at those as kind of the starting points, and perhaps just mitigating the height. So I know people are going to think about, they're going to be right on top of me. It doesn't have to be that way if well planned. And as we move forward, we'll be able to show some good examples that have worked in other areas. We'll show some examples of even what not to do. Mm-hmm. So while we were prepared to bring some of those images here, we just kind of held back until the right time.
I get it. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, well, so with that, the presentation is drawing to a conclusion, but as we do, I wanted to just re-summarize where we've come from and where we're going. So where we've come from is coming from a recommendation over a long process, an exhaustive process by the Downtown Parking Committee that was just made up of a really good spectrum of multiple stakeholders throughout the downtown. And since early 2015, we've been engaged in that process. Really, this is the result of that process. So I want to kind of sum up 3 points to the recommendation that we've placed up here. And one, let's talk about the parking supply again. adding to the parking supply and meeting the demand issues has been a goal of the Master Land Use Plan, and developing the downtown opportunity and developing density is a goal. It also aligns well with the DDA's strategic goals that they passed this year. And by selecting this site at West Troy, you would add 254 parking spaces to the existing area right now, which would net you out again 389. Getting an agreement with Credit Union 1 would add 221 spaces to the east side. So you're looking at a net gain with both of those developments, considering over 400 parking spaces added to the downtown, which is a good goal.
I have a question, Joe.
Sure.
Was it Carl Walker did a study a couple years ago, and they said that we needed some 400 plus, so parking spots to deal with those demand at the time. And so I was just wondering, combined between the Credit Union one and the West Side capacity, would we fulfill that target?
I don't have those specific numbers with me right now.
That'd be an interesting.
But we will be, and I'll get to that. That's going to be involved in the next steps,
Okay.
looking at that
To my
number.
recollection, it's a great question. To my recollection, I think we're mighty close if we're not there.
The second point, again, is really emphasizing the financial responsibility. When we embarked in this process, our goal was to develop 2 sites. Due to fiscal constraints and stewardship, we are going to be narrowed to 1 site. So where would we do that? Again, taking into all these considerations in the question, lead to that recommendation. And certainly a piece of that is the potential to develop a greater tax base in the long term, thinking about the sustainable investment of downtown. And third, the safer development bet. When we talk about economic durability and how we support our local businesses, that is certainly a crucial piece. And that third piece, the safer development bet, speaks to our goals as a community for the Master Land Use Plan, as stated in the Master Land Use Plan. What are our development and land use goals? And it speaks to the Downtown Development Authority's goals as well. What are our goals for business attraction and retention, and how do we support those businesses and grow more opportunities? So what would the next steps look like? Well, if you look at the left side, this is where we're here. This is today, right now. So we are just simply presenting to you a recommendation from the Parking Committee that this, of the sites selected for review, this is the site that we believe is the most responsible and will be the most effective in meeting all of our known goals as stated at the outset. Where we are now, we know that the required parking supply increase will require 4 levels, and at a minimum. If we were to pursue the City Hall, it would be 5 levels. So we know that Lot 6, the West Troy lot, would be a smaller footprint. We know that sustainable parking structures are more successful when combined with other uses. What does that mean? That means adding to the mixed-use potential and adding to the attractive street-level activation and supporting our downtown business environment. And number 3, we know that the parking structure must be safe and secure. And all of those points roll into how we will engage in a process with public engagement. I want to emphasize this first and foremost, and I also want to emphasize our guests from the community who did attend today and who did speak already, that public engagement is our first and foremost our priority in moving forward. If the site recommendation is approved, we have secured funding, or we have set aside funding, which would follow this item, just to spend on public engagement and working with you and making sure that we're getting all the feedback from everybody who would be impacted by this development in the process. And that would be immediately, next day. We'll be engaging in that. And then third, we'll begin the schematic design process. And I'm going to go ahead and let you guys talk a little bit about schematic design and defining that for the public, because I probably won't do it eloquently. Yes, and I'd also like to introduce Carrie. She's going to be helping the city lead the public engagement effort.
Thank you, Joe. So if you'll indulge me, I wanted to just begin with a brief introduction, since it's the first time I've met you as sort of a full city council body, and by extension also the residents who were here earlier and may still be in the audience. So my name is Carrie Sheldon. I'm the founder of Bridgeport Consulting. We're an intentionally small consulting firm located in Ann Arbor. Please don't hold that against us. I remember Councilman's comment at the Planning Commission last Wednesday night. That stuck with me.
Thank you.
Surprised.
Why?
So I always start with the mission. The mission of Bridgeport Consulting is to help individuals and organizations and communities become the very best that they can be. So deliberately alluding to a few different levels of scale at which we work. Public engagement is a core part of our practice disciplines, and it's one that I personally am particularly passionate about, and it really alludes to that community level of scale. It's kind of our approach to public engagement is really founded in kind of this core belief or principle that a high-functioning democracy is predicated on a fully engaged public, and that public policy decisions and investments are able to be informed by the people whose lives they will most directly affect. So that's kind of our philosophical approach. We've done a number. I've been in consulting for 8 years. The entirety of that time, I've done public engagement processes, largely with the City of Ann Arbor. We usually almost always have 1 or 2 projects going at any one time. Prior to getting into consulting, I also spent almost a decade in the public sector. So I've sat in Joe's seat before, the sort of equivalent of that. So I'm familiar with public processes and just what it takes and the kind of investment that people have already made in terms of the Downtown Parking Committee and others. And I really appreciate that and respect it. So starting with the end in mind, just to say a few words about what our goal is of the public engagement process, I would say there's 2 kind of buckets on that. One for the project itself, that it aligns with community values, that it reflects the feedback that we get from stakeholders at every step along the way, and balances all of those, of course, with what Mayor has had his eyes on, which is the fiscal constraints of the city. So we want to be sure that we're living within our means while still being, acting with integrity and reflecting the needs, the desires, the interests of stakeholders from the barbecue level on up. And secondly, for the process itself, that's a good opportunity to raise awareness and visibility of the project, to really be inclusive, to incorporate lessons learned from previous efforts and not remake the same mistakes, and all along to ensure really transparent, open communication back and forth. All the while making sure that the experience both during the public engagement process, during construction, as it travels along toward that, and then after the parking deck is complete, is as positive as possible. So parking mitigation is a major piece of that, and there are other factors as well. So those are the goals of a public engagement process. When I mentioned stakeholders, it could be valuable to put a sharper point on that, and I understand you probably have more detail on the public engagement plan itself in your packet, but just to take a look at that in a little bit more detail. I think of stakeholders typically as kind of those concentric circles. So starting with city affiliates, we go to the DDA and the Planning Commission, City Council, and kind of do the measured steps there, make sure everybody is on board and aligned with the decisions that we're making, and from there very quickly outward to the residents and businesses directly adjacent to the site who will be most directly impacted. We really want to hear their voices. That would be the first step. So we're imagining focus groups. There could be individual outreach. We can define that together as a community. And then on outward, of course, we want to have a good social media presence, make sure that the community at large has access to information on a project website so that even if you're not directly adjacent to the site, you can be well informed and understand what's happening throughout. Also, visitors will need to know what's happening, particularly if the Credit Union 1 deck is an opportunity. We'll need to raise awareness around that. So community at large and media are 2 other kind of stakeholder groups. But again, just kind of moving outward from those who are most directly affected from the decision-making bodies on outward and keeping that going throughout. I imagine that we've conceptualized the public engagement process as unfolding in 3 major stages or phases with different emphases in each of those stages. The first is really just this. It's an early conversation. It's introducing the project. It's describing the history that led us to this point and gathering early priorities and principles and values that we need to be taking into consideration even as the preliminary design is taking shape. So what are some of the architectural elements that we can have in good design that will make that more palatable to the people who are directly affected or who will see the project every day. So that's really stage 1, is just that early feedback period. From there, using that feedback to refine the design selections. So heading into then stage 2, which is more about preliminary design, where maybe we can narrow the suite of choices to say option A, B, and C. Let's pick those apart and see what you like about each, what you don't like about each. And again, balancing different interests community-wide and those directly adjacent is sort of the art rather than the science of this. Heading into kind of distilling the feedback themes. Then after we get into that, detailed design starts to take shape, start to narrow down where we are. And then, of course, closing the stakeholder feedback process at that stage and moving into preparing for construction. So that's really high level, just orientation. Happy to take questions and also happy to leave my cards for people. But I'll stop there and turn it over to you two for schematic design.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so schematic design, what the heck is that? There's kind of 4 steps with the architectural process. It starts out with concept design, and if you were building a house, you might flip through some magazines and say, I kind of like that, and I kind of like that, and I kind of like this. And I want 3 bedrooms, I want certain kitchen, certain living room, that sort of thing. And you've kind of assembled some ideas, and you kind of know what you get for the lay of the land. That's about where schematic design begins. We kind of know about how big. It's bigger than a bread box and smaller than the Empire State Building. And we'll kind of develop that as it evolves. And the stakeholder process will, the engagement process will probably drive some of those decisions. So we'll start out with massing, and and just street level concepts. What is good design? And then we'll eventually evolve into it's this many feet by that many feet. It's made out of this kind of material, to get a sense of how much something might cost. Everything has a cost, and if we start to get crazy and do something that we can't afford and the public loves it and we have to retract, we've made a mistake. And so we balance the fiscal responsibility with that and maintain our budget and get to a point where we're not getting the cart in front of the horse, and we've got kind of buy-in. And in schematic design, we won't go all the way through that process. We'll just kind of touch on that process as we move forward, and then we'll take a kind of a deep breath, make sure we're on track with all of the features of the project and all of the stakeholders are on the same page, and then a more formal process of actually figuring out how to build it, when to build it, and where to build it comes after that. I'll be happy to answer any questions if there are some.
Yeah, that's great. Actually, Council, that does kind of conclude the update. So the recommendation, as was shown on the previous slide, is to select lot number 6, the West Troy lot, as the preferred site to develop a parking development based on the recommendation from the Parking Committee. And with that, we'll open it up to questions.
Just on this slide, it doesn't end with construction, but just to give folks a sense, because that actually sounds like a long time, but I know it moves relatively quickly. When would you think that we would be in construction phase?
I think the high-level objective would still be to shoot for spring 2017.
In the spring. All right.
Spring ends in June.
Depending on the weather, September.
I had to.
All right, so that was a lot of information. Thank you, Joe. At this point, because I know there are people here from the public who have sat very patiently, I would allow anyone that was here in the public that wants to address council on this question to come on up and do so. If you want to give opinions, that's fine. We're not going to debate tonight, but if you have questions of fact, we have the experts here that might be able to help some of those questions as well. So if there's anyone here from the public that would like to address council on this item, this would be an appropriate time to do so.
And I'd also invite you to take one of my business cards as well. I've provided those as my direct contact information.
Thank you. I'll come back up.
Yeah, okay.
Bernie Frazier, I'm at 346 West Saratoga. My property line butts right up against that parking lot. And I think this is the only parking lot that actually has residents that butt up to it. You know, all the other parking lots don't have any residents that butt up to it. I know you talked about a buffer zone on Allen Road, but, you know, there already is a 2-lane street and big buffer there. We don't have a buffer. If my barbecue here, where you're at, is where this 4-story building would be starting. And, you know, you'd be looking up, you'd have tons of people being able to see. I'd never have any privacy to even have barbecue again. You know, we've talked a lot about community engagement. It seems like this is a done deal. They're asking you to vote on this recommendation. And from the list of people that were given, I counted, I think, 10 business leaders that were in this committee and maybe 1 resident. And I don't know if that resident lives on any of these streets. So, they're asking you to vote on something, talking how community engagement is very important, but yet the residents who live right along here have not been engaged. Our engagement began Friday evening when I opened up my mail and got this letter. That's not really good community engagement. It seemed to me to be a kind of a let's try and get this thing through before the public can do anything about it. They didn't put down the time of the meeting in this letter. We had to go look it up, and all my neighbors were asking, well, when is it? When is it? So, that's a great concern, for us residents, because this is something that is going to affect us greatly. My house was built in 1920, so it's going to be 100 years old. I was going to celebrate 100th anniversary for my house, or birthday for my house, but I have concerns because my sewage goes back into that alleyway, back into that lot. What's going to happen to my foundation when they start building this building right behind my house? Who's going to address these concerns? What's going to happen with those things? But as I say, it's just kind of very disappointing to me that it seems like this is already a done deal and the community really hasn't been engaged. And you're asking to vote on this tonight without really getting the community's input. There's been business input, a lot of business input it seems, but there hasn't been any really input from the residents who live right there. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Hi. I'm Randy Stewart, and I'm at 364 West Saratoga, and I'm right 2 doors down from Bernie Fraser. And my main concern, and I understand the importance of parking, just because I do live on West Saratoga, and there's tons of cars and things like that. And I guess, if this is a done deal, if this is happening, then some of the things, like Ms. Fraser said about our engagement, or like you've all talked about, how important it is to have our input, because, a couple things. One, I don't want for people to say, oh, we want your input, and then we give our input, and then when a financial problem comes, well, your thing is going to be the first thing that gets cut, or the first thing that's not going to be considered because, whatever. Right. It is difficult to think when the structure is, when I'm looking out my back gate or whatever in the structure, of course, in my mind, I'm visualizing a big solid thing, and maybe it is going to be beautiful, and maybe it is going to be all this wonderful stuff, but I'm thinking, as someone who used to just have access to go out my back door and go right into downtown, now I have to go, now I'm in an alleyway, which is going to be dark. I'm having a new roommate she's a lot younger. I'm thinking now her safety, because it's going to be a lit alleyway. I'm thinking, are you really going to ask my input of what this should look like if it's something that has to be there? Because I'm thinking I should be able to just walk right through this parking structure easily, and so, those are things that are concern for me. I also feel that I don't want us to be sort of sacrificial lamb about, well, the inconvenience of a few because of the benefit of the city. I feel that's unfair because I feel we've already sort of been a sacrificial lamb in regards to who has to pay for your friends to park at your residence, because 2 people over don't have to pay or find this,
residential parking program?
Yeah, residential parking. That, no one else has to do that, but we have to, those who live, I'm like, the benefit of moving to Ferndale was to live closer to downtown, and then I seem like I'm getting sort of shafted in a sense that I have to do all these extra things to live downtown, and I feel that's a little unfair, so I really would hate that it becomes to the point where they go, well, we understand you live down there, but, we got to think about the greater good for everyone else. Yeah. And I certainly do invite all the council members to come to my house, and we'll do a barbecue. And you can look to see what that would actually look like, because I think talking about it is one thing, but actually coming to see imagine a structure in my backyard, what that would look like. And how would you like it to look if it were your backyard? Those of you who live in, well, all of you live in town. So, and I'm sure a lot of us would love, a structure on our neighbor's backyard. But I would hope that you would keep that in consideration when you're putting this up and what would really be beneficial for us who live there and who pay taxes and who love it here, versus the people who come and visit here every so often, drink all night, throw bottles in my backyard, and then leave.
Yep.
So just something to consider, and I would be more than welcome to be on the let's talk about it, and what is it going to look like, and the visualization of that, if it's something that's
We definitely will,
going to
because
happen.
to the answer to your first question of will you really ask for our input, but the answer is absolutely yes. And the other commitment I'll make is we won't promise you anything that we can't afford or that we can't follow through on. And so if you have ideas, we'll take them, we'll evaluate them. We won't promise things that we can't
Right.
deliver. So that I can assure you, which is why we had her speak, because we want to make that commitment clear that we are serious about the input that we get from residents in the community.
Right. Because I know
And I'll take you up on that barbecue.
Pardon?
And the barbecue, too.
Okay, great. I expect you. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Randy. There's another gentleman, yeah. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Garb Boyajin. I also live on West Saratoga, 376, and I also, my backyard is to the alley, and I have a family there of 4 children, so it's a big concern for me. So going to the consideration for the site, which I think that's the first step still, again, I'm reiterating what was said, but as far as stakeholders, it was, I think, just the businesses at this point. So right now the residents are behind. You're asking for our input later on, but we didn't have any input now. And you said it was, we went to this committee and we said, where should we build a parking deck? But really it wasn't that. It was just, we own this lot, where should we build a parking deck? And, they chose both spots, but financially you could only do one. So that's how we ended up with this lot. So that being said, I think there was one thing I didn't hear about any consideration on, and that was traffic volumes, traffic patterns that are going to be affected with all these cars going. Now, I'm assuming one entryway on West Troy. I don't know if you go there a lot during the day, or I don't know if weekends as well, but you got all these loading, bringing in their beer, food supplies, and they have the spots to, load and unload, but that's not enough. They're blocking off lanes, and you got cars going around and waiting to go around, and how's that going to be when you increase all that traffic in that area? So you already have sometimes when you have to close off 9 Mile, you use West Troy to go through to Woodward, or other times, the festivals. Are you going to have cars cutting through the alley? Are you going to have cars going into the residential streets to get to Woodward? Is it going to be, you're going to have to block off Allen, south of Troy, so that you keep those 2 different traffic patterns separated, so you're not imposing on the residents. So I don't know if they looked at that at all.
Do you want to address that, Joe? I would just say briefly, we're aware that this is going to change the traffic patterns in that area, and that's part of what will have to happen in the future. But Joe?
Sure, yeah, that's administratively, that's part of our due diligence process in the next steps. So clearly, no matter where we put a development, it's going to alter traffic flow. So we're going to work with our partners in TIA to do a traffic analysis. We'll work with Republic Parking to do a demand analysis and get an assessment of the current parking traffic that's going there right now and what we could expect moving forward. So that's all part of the next steps, but we need to determine a site in which to engage in that review and administrative process. And so in doing so, yeah, we recognize at the outset that that's going to be a factor. Yeah. And we're going to need to understand how that looks.
I request that we also do a pedestrian analysis, because this is a highly pedestrian zone, and so I hope that we would include that as part of improving this area, not just for cars, but also for people, because there are pedestrians who come out of their cars and walk from their cars to the businesses. They're not just drivers. So can we make sure we include that in?
Bicycle lanes, bicyclists go through.
Look, right. And when you look back at the knowns that we discussed, making a place for the public and a place for people is one of the core knowns that we must keep that in our minds as we move forward. Yeah.
Another thing I had to add, so this has been, like you said, a long, ongoing thing over 10 years, and part of it's kind of been, it's been the same lots considered. When you had the 360 plant, that was that same lot, and like 10, 15 years ago, there was a huge development idea there, and it got shut down. So I don't know if this will go through. Maybe this time it'll be different. It won't be as ambitious. I know that they were going to do at one point over 70 feet tall. Again, it's very limited options that you're going back to the same spot. And back to the Save-A-Lot lot. I know you said it was financially unfeasible to buy it, but what about a land swap? Was that ever considered? I mean, the lot, I looked at Google Maps, and pretty much, maybe it's a little bit smaller, the Troy Allen.
Right.
It's a little bit closer to the downtown. I don't know if that would add value, if that was ever considered, because, again, you're having a parking lot where people have to drive deeper into the downtown to park, whereas if you were at the Save-A-Lot lot, it's on 9 Mile, it's on a major road. If you have wayfinding signs, or get the word out that, well, if you come from the west side, if you're coming from 696, come down to Coolidge, or if you're coming from the south, take 8 Mile to Livernois, you're avoiding traffic that is going through, avoid the pedestrians, the bicyclists. Again, less residential impact too, because that's just, you got one side residence, and that's mainly an apartment building. I think maybe there's 2 or 3 houses there too, I'm not sure. And then you could save the Troy Allen lot for something more commercial, purely commercial, just or retail. And then I had a few other notes just from hearing. So it was down to 4 levels, but it could be 5. I know you were saying you wanted to limit the impact to the residents, but then if you wanted to make it look nice, you had to make it a little bit multi-use, but that might increase the height. So kind of where does that come into play? Are you going to minimize the structure? Are you going to make it look nice? Does it have to be mixed use? And if it's mixed use, is it on top of the parking structure, or is it adjacent to it?
Well, all great questions, and I'd like to emphasize these are all great questions that we'd like to answer and develop answers for while working with you. I can tell you that when we talk about 4 levels, that we're just focusing on the core requirement to actually meet the parking supply, and that's all we're focusing on. And I could leave it at that. But those are great questions, and that's what we kind of expect when we begin the public engagement process.
And there is the potential that you could do office on top of this deck, and that's something that needs to be explored. But just to your question of mixed use versus, I think this council has expressed, and councils before this have expressed, that what we really don't want to do is a standalone deck with nothing attached to it, that this is too valuable a piece of property. We don't get very many opportunities to change the character of our downtown and to develop in our downtown, and to do that with a straight up prefab deck that would be I think the planners call a dead zone in terms of pedestrians having to walk past this sort of structure with nothing attached to it. So we, I think, all agree, and like I said, councils before us, when they pursued this, have all recognized that there's a development potential here beyond just housing cars. So that has been our philosophy, and we've been pretty clear about that from the very beginning, although we asked the Parking Committee to sort of speak to that, and they agreed, and as did the DDA. But that's been our philosophy, our driving philosophy, just to be candid and honest about it from the beginning. Oh, and so, anyone else from the public that would like to address council this evening before we start to talk about this? All right. Seeing none, I will open it up to questions and comments of council.
I'll just say this, sitting on the Planning Commission, and we've got a preview of this last week, I don't have a significant number of questions left because I think Joe and team did an adequate job presenting this at the Planning Commission. I just want to reiterate that we're just at the point we have to make a decision about where to look to develop this. We all recognize it's a need. I think it's we just can't go any farther without that assertion. I think everything else, most everything else around this is a blank slate outside of location, and I'm very excited about the public engagement process to make it look nice, to make it functional with the neighborhood, to continue to meet our needs. So I don't want my lack of questions to appear to be apathetic. I've just already been exposed to this pretty considerably up to this point. So.
Okay.
Well, through the chair, I just wanted to echo Councilman Martin. I think this process in the parking committee has been very helpful to navigate the feedback we heard from the first project and really coming up with a process that would work for everyone to get public input and engagement to help figure out what this thing should look like and how it's going to serve multiple interests of the neighborhood and the businesses and our visitors. And so to that end, I look forward to the conversations. And I heard tonight safety and lighting are important, loading zones, how do the residents, navigate the alleyway. So I think these are all important things that I hope our consultant is writing down in terms of, following up as things that we need to discuss deliberately and intentionally to figure out how to include the best design to solve and address these issues that we've heard from our residents today.
And I'll add that because she made fun of me, and rightly so. I mean, I think, we're very sensitive to the culture and feel of not only the neighborhoods, but Ferndale itself as a unique entity. We heard that loud and clear in previous discussions, and it's been very prevalent about this discussion, too. So I feel that piece has been and will continue to be even more forcefully well represented.
Yeah.
And I will say to the residents, I think I speak for all of us when we say we are extremely sensitive to the fact that we would be building something close to you. I would point out that there's really almost nowhere we could build this that wouldn't impact somebody. If you did it in the Withington lot, the Withington residents would have similar issues. Frankly, if you did it in the Save-A-Lot property, there are people on Withington that live behind that. So from the beginning, we knew that wherever we did this, we were going to be impacting residents in some form or fashion. And so we had to, it wasn't that we didn't seek the input, it's that we needed to evaluate this based on cost and the ability to construct it and these other factors. But we are serious about engaging you and engaging this community, not just immediate residents, because one of the things we heard in the last project was the project for all of the residents of Ferndale need to feel like you're not going to change the character of Ferndale. I don't know how many times I heard, I don't want to be X city, and I won't name them. So there's a lot of design aspects of this that we want to make sure we get right, including and most importantly how it affects the people that are closest to it. And so I just tell you that's a major consideration of ours, and it always has been.
And if I may, through the mayor, there was a comment about the 360 project. What is unique about this situation, and I know that you've expressed it, is that we are starting from a blank slate. We are in control, and the community will be part of that control of what this project is going to look like. We're not going to have a private developer coming every couple of months saying this is the change in the design we'd like to approve. It's going to be us working with the community, working with the businesses to develop this project. That is what's different about this from the 360 project.
Well, in partnership with the architect.
Yes.
And I've always said that Ferndale is a perfect opportunity for an architect to really gnaw on their design chops, to do something different and something that is worthy to put in your portfolio. And I hope that is brought to bear onto this project that meets Ferndale's values and our character. And no design schlock.
No car jail?
If that's a term.
I just want to, first of all, thank everyone who's had their input as far as, there's a lot of work that went into this and just really narrowing it down to the sites, really assessing what the development potential that we could do here. I also want to thank the residents that came out because there were some very valid points made there and regarding the traffic and on Troy, regarding the businesses that receive their deliveries and things like that. I've gone through that many times, and I know exactly what this gentleman's talking about. I would hope that the community members tonight and even more community members would definitely be on that engagement process. And that's one of the things that excited me about it because you will have an input, a real input, as to how you want it to look. Whether it be, I don't know. I don't know what the design will be. That will be what we'll decide. But glass block windows, beautiful greenery, just things that will at least give you still your property and your privacy to have, and for you to entertain in your place comfortably. So I'm really excited to hear what our residents are going to have to say and what's going to come out of it because it's an exciting project. It's exciting, and I'm glad it's coming, but definitely the people that are most impacted have to feel as if they're being heard. So I'm going to particularly be paying attention to that and seeing that ideas and things are thoughtfully acknowledged and that these residents are listened to. So.
And I guess I would like to add on to that because she said something that I also want to make sure is clear. Even though we're going to address the challenges that we have and from a design standpoint and traffic and all those things, I'm excited about this project. We have waited a long time to try to address this. And in my opinion, doing nothing is not an option. Our downtown is at a breaking point in terms of its capacity to house cars. And I hope and I believe that the public transportation will help alleviate that and greater emphasis on bikes and all the rest and pedestrian and all the rest of it. But there is no question in my mind that if Ferndale is going to continue to be successful in the future and compete against other communities and the communities that are thriving now in Detroit, in Midtown, and downtown, which never used to be sort of competitors of ours, friendly competitors, but if we're going to continue to be a viable and successful community going forward, we have to do something about the parking issue. And so I'm excited to get started finally because, as we've said, this council and previous councils before them have been talking about this for a very long time, and it's time for us to get serious and actually do something. And I think this will go a long way to help the future success of our city. Anyone else?
Can I make a motion?
Please.
I would move the City Council support the determination of the Downtown Parking Committee to pursue a parking development on the site identified as lot number 6, provided by the Downtown Parking Committee and unanimously supported by the Ferndale Downtown Development Authority.
I support.
It was moved by Martin and supported by Piana. Is there any last comments or questions before we vote?
I just wanted to add for the public to note that the parking website, it has been launched, www.parkferndale.com. If you want to follow that website for frequent updates and project materials, including tonight's presentation, we'll be loading it up there and we'll be stocking it full of resources and updates as frequently as we can.
Excellent. Thank you. Marley, would you call the roll, please?
Councilmembers Leaks May?
Yes.
Martin?
Yes.
Polika?
Yes.
Piana?
Yes.
And Mayor Coulter?
Yes, thank you. That recommendation is adopted. Moving on to the second item now is the consideration of an authorization to initiate the public engagement and Phase 2. So, as you know, we've been in Phase 1. We've already engaged these folks that you see here in some of the initial investigation, but now that we've made this determination, it's time to enter Phase 2, which includes the public engagement portion of that. Joe, not to steal your...
Certainly, yeah, and we've touched on this, as you've mentioned, to extent, but really what we're asking for is a follow-up of that site recommendation is to pivot and transition into Phase 2, which is really going to be focusing on setting aside resources to support public engagement in the beginning of the schematic design that he had touched on.
Right.
Shall I make a motion?
So motion would be in order, yes.
All right. I move that City Council authorizes moving forward with public engagement and schematic design per the activities listed in Phase 2 in the letter intent provided by Carl Walker, Parking Consultants, for the amount listed and to be paid from the auto parking fund from the account listed.
Support. Or, Rosemary?
You go ahead.
Yep, so moved by Raylon Leaks May, Councilwoman Leaks May, and supported by Councilman Martin. Is there any further discussion?
Just have a question/comment. How are we going to ensure, or let me put it this way, is there a way that we can ensure the residents that will directly abut the potential project be in constant communication when meetings are determined and they have an opportunity for input? Are we going to put a list together of those residents with contact numbers so that I don't want any of those residents to ever say, I didn't know about this meeting?
No, we wholeheartedly agree. And yeah, now that the site has been selected and we can begin to pursue the public engagement, we have luckily, because of the RPZ program, as noted previously, we have a lot of that contact information because you have the free residential permits through us. So we will reach out to you via that, as well as direct mailing. You'll, as noted, we did some direct deliveries on Friday. We'll be doing the same thing moving forward, giving updates on timelines and public engagement efforts as we can.
Okay.
Transparency is of the utmost importance.
Thank you.
Good point. Any other comments or questions? All right, Marnie, would you call the roll?
Councilmembers Martin,
Yes.
Polika,
Yes.
Piana,
Yes.
Leaks May,
Yes.
and Mayor Coulter.
Yes, thank you. That item is also adopted. Moving on now to the item that was added, we'll call it 7C, is the possible appointments to the Arts and Culture Commission. Councilman Martin.
Sure. First off, I want to extend my apologies to my colleagues for adding this so late. This is my fault. I'm a couple meetings late getting this added, but the Ferndale Arts and Culture Commission has a number of vacancies and more interest than we have openings, to be honest with you. So I sat down and met with the chair of the Arts Commission, and we'd like to extend an invitation to the following applicants to join the Arts and Culture Commission. Lydia, and I'm so sorry with these names, Lydia Jakovsky brings a great experience with vocal music education. She's a private voice and piano instructor, and so as well as an elementary teacher, so coming from the musical arts. We've got Sarah Dottie, who is actually the assistant curator of education at Cranbrook Art Museum, and she manages multiple education programs for multiple ages, which is actually a neat skill set to add to our current Arts Commission. Then lastly, we have Matt Livengood, who actually comes from a graphic artist perspective and works for advertising agencies as a project manager, as well as also in organization and development. I love his application because he says, it's taught me the necessities of staying organized and calm.
All right, there you go.
Which I think are all great additions. So I'd be happy to entertain questions or comments, but to move the item forward, I'll extend a motion that we add Lydia Jakovsky, Sarah Doty, and Matt Livengood to the Arts and Culture Commission for terms set to expire 12/31/17.
Is there support?
Support.
All right, so moved by Martin, supported by Leaks May. Now any comments or discussion?
What a great group.
It's a really great group. I doubt any of them will know these here, right? It was the last minute. I'm really excited to add some skill sets that Jason and I determined the committee needs, or the commission needs, and is currently open, and they're currently kind of new to the whole experience. So I think they're going to mix very well with some folks that have been engaged for a long time.
I was going to say, one thing that struck me is how all these are relatively recent residents, and so nice job sort of reaching out and identifying new folks in town and getting them involved, which is always really helpful and important.
I think it's a nice balance, so I'm glad they're willing to join.
Happy to support it. Any other discussion? All right, Marnie, would you call the roll, please?
Councilmembers Polika,
Yes.
Piana,
Yes.
Leaks May,
Yes.
Martin,
Yes.
and Mayor Coulter.
Yes, thank you. Those appointments are adopted.
Thank you.
Now moving on to call to council. Police chief is still here. Chief Collins, anything for the good of the community this evening?
Nothing further. Thank you, Your Honor.
All right. Mr. Fire Marshal Batten is here on behalf of the fire department. Anything for the good of the community this evening?
Nothing else, Your Honor.
That's it. All right. Jordan, anything else from community economic development?
No, sir.
All right. Anything else from recreation? If you do, I just need you to come up here because the folks at home won't be able to hear you if you're not on a mic. We can hear you and your booming voice, but they cannot. 2 meetings in a row. You're getting pretty familiar around here.
Just real quick, the Recreation Department just had our Fall Festival, Hilton Fall Festival, on October 8th. We believe that it's been a pretty good success. We've gotten a lot of positive feedback from it. Some of the highlights were our marshmallow eating contest, our sack races, and of course our trick-or-treat trails. And we wanted to give a big thank you to Jimmy John's, Red Olive, Luxury Lanes, Go Comedy, Dickey's Barbecue, Hungry Howie's, Boys and Girls Club of Oakland and Macomb counties, Central Woodward Junior Chamber, and the Phi Beta Sigma fraternity out of Wayne State University. They were all very big helps in helping us with volunteers and by donating different supplies and things that made it go off without a hitch. And our next big event is the Holiday Showplace. That's going to take place on December 3rd. That's an arts and crafts type fair, and then we coupled that along with our Breakfast with Santa event, which is always really popular with kids and everything. We also opened up registration for Little Eagles. We are actively accepting dog park renewals because it's getting to that time where some of them are set to expire, and they're coming in and working on those. And we are offering our evening yoga and salsa and boot camp and all types of different evening classes. So,
Can you combine the yoga and salsa? That would be really interesting.
I'm sure you could some kind of way, but
I don't know,
yeah,
salsa
that's all.
and boot camp.
And then speaking of dog park permits, can we get a sort of a review of how many we had and how the program went this year and where we think that's at? Okay, that would be great. Thank you. Cool. All right, thank you, sir. DPW, anything?
Nothing tonight, Your
Nothing else. We've started. Have we started? We've started collecting leaves. Yeah. Last week was the first week.
Into our second week.
All right. And there's a schedule out that you can go to our website on. You'll be getting it in your newsletter in lots of ways, but just know we have a schedule for picking up leaves, and it has begun. Thank you. I don't know if I stole any thunder from you, Kara, but Kara, anything from community engagement this evening?
Yes, the leaf pickup schedule is in the newsletter that was delivered. It's also on the website. It's in the news section of the website. It's on the social media sites, and it's even in some of our local newspapers. So anywhere you look, you should be able to find it.
Okay.
A couple just really quick things. We have an election coming up on November 8th. Maybe you've heard. And I'm sure Marnie will talk more about this when it's her chance to chat, but I wanted to give you a couple of quick things. One is that on Election Day, we are going to be using a hashtag, hashtag Ferndale Voter 311. It's going to be monitored on all sites. So if you use it on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, wherever you use it, we're going to be watching for it. And it's just going to be a way that we can allow voters to reach out to us if there are any issues. Long lines piling up, an issue with one of the inspection workers, anything. Kudos if it goes really great, which I hope it will, and I'm sure it will. So we'll be watching that all day long. We'll use that to be able to send help if needed, more assistance, whatever. So we will make sure that that is put out everywhere so that people know to use that. Obviously, they can also get a hold of us by calling, emailing, social media, all the usual ways. The other thing I just wanted to mention is, and quickly, we also have a short animated video that we're going to be launching this week with some kind of last-minute essential information for voters, as well as that hashtag. So we're going to ask that everybody share that out so that everything is known on Election Day. We don't have any surprises. And then I was asked by our parking crew just to remind everybody that parking is free all day on Election Day, and we will make sure we get the word out about that as well.
And signs.
Signs, yes.
Thank you.
And signs. Marnie will mention that. That's it.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Anything from the finance department this evening? No? Okay. Marnie, I hear we have an election coming up.
Yeah, that's what they tell me. Yes, we do have absentee ballots available now until November 5th. And I just wanted to kind of express something. Ferndale is such a special place. And it's really an interesting atmosphere right now. And I just want to urge all of our voters to really be respectful of the electoral process and treat others with civility. There's a lot of opposing viewpoints right now, but every citizen deserves their opportunity to cast their vote their way without intimidation and without feeling like other people are not approving of what they're doing. So Michigan election law prohibits campaigning within 100 feet of a precinct, which, you think of that as being the signs up, but it also means a lot more. It means not showing or wearing any election-related clothing, hats, buttons, all that jazz. In order to keep our polling places as fair and impartial as possible, we're asking that everyone please be cognizant that our election inspectors will be enforcing that law quite vigorously, just to make sure that everyone has their right to feel like they can cast their vote the way that they want to without any kind of intimidation. So we just want all of our voters to feel like they're treated fairly and with respect. We've worked really hard to improve the flow in precinct management, and we just need our neighbors to help us make it smooth on election day.
Well said. Thank you. April, anything for the city manager's office?
No, we're all set tonight. Thank
All
you.
right. Dan, anything? from the
Just
league?
one item, Mayor. Earlier tonight, you heard the master plan presentation from Jordan and the proposed timeline associated with the circulation of that of the master plan to different agencies. There should be a motion for council to approve the distribution of the master plan as required under the Michigan Planning Enabling Act.
Tonight?
So I would, in order to meet the timeline that is proposed and that was presented to you,
Yes.
a motion would be in order to that effect.
And to add to that, the Planning Commission passed a similar motion on Wednesday.
Uh-huh.
So I'd like to make a motion to approve distribution of the proposed master plan as requested under the Planning Enabling Act.
I support.
All right, moved by Martin, supported by Piana. Any discussion on that item? Thanks for catching that, Dan. All right, Marty, would you call the roll?
Council members Piana?
Yes.
Leaks May?
Yes.
Martin?
Yes.
Polika?
Yes.
And Mayor Coulter?
Yes, thank you. That item is
Thank you,
adopted.
Mayor. Nothing
Yep.
further.
Thank you. Councilman Martin.
Real simply, I hope everyone has a safe and happy Halloween. A lot of little kids running the streets, so be careful. And the election, thank God, is soon. So I just encourage everybody to vote. This is the time of year I really miss our friend who would come and present and talk about the right and to vote. And Dennis, yeah, Hopner. And I think this is a very special community, and I know we can pull this off with tolerance and style. So look forward to that day coming.
Yeah. That's it. Very good. Councilwoman Leaks May.
I have nothing tonight.
All right, Councilman Polika.
In the spirit of elections, I just want to let everybody know on October 30th from 1 to 2:30 here at City Hall, the Citizens for a Fair Ferndale will be holding their candidate forum. They focus solely on local elections, so this year we have some school board members and some library members that are running. So if you would like to know more about those candidates, I highly encourage you to come to that. But I believe that it will be recorded and it will be on our cable. I don't think we're recording it. I think they have their own person that does a taping. And
they do,
yeah. So if you can't make it, just watch for it on our cable station. And the other thing is kind of touching off of what you shared, Marnie, about the election season. And I was speaking with someone, on an acquaintance on social media, and he shared with me his dislike for the whole election process and felt that it was very fraudulent. And I challenged him, and we had a very detailed conversation, and I said, I encourage you to contact your local community, your clerk, whether it's a township or city, and become a election volunteer. You actually get paid for it, but they're called volunteers. And be a part of the process, and then tell me whether or not you think it's fraudulent. And I challenge anybody, if you think that there's something wrong with the electoral system, then become involved and see for yourself whether or not it is after you work the system. So that's what I have to share today.
Very fair. Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Piana.
Yeah. Halloween is around the corner, and the Dales Neighborhood Group is hosting, I believe, its 4th annual Halloween tent. We pass out candy and cider and donuts for adults and children, and it's a way for the neighborhood to get to know your other neighbors and for kids to meet other kids in their neighborhood and relax as you go door to door trick-or-treating with your kids. This tent stays up, torrential rain, and more rain, because that's what's happened over the last few Halloweens. And so I'm praying for a very dry Halloween this year. It's in front of Taft, and it's from 6 to 8. So look for it on Fielding Street.
And if I may, Mayor Pro Tem, who happens to sponsor that tent?
Oh, yes. Thank you. This year, the Dales Neighborhood Group received a grant from the Ferndale Community Foundation. Yes, of up to $1,000 to help do activities that benefit the neighborhood and encourage neighbors to meet neighbors.
Said the chair of the
yes.
Community Foundation.
No, I was just curious.
In addition to bringing people together, what the foundation grant really did was that there's been a core set of volunteers paying for out-of-pocket for the candy, donuts, and cider. We've got a couple donations from a few businesses, but this helps offset the cost of hosting these events. And we really appreciate that as this little neighborhood group tries to grow and encourage more volunteers to be part of making the neighborhood really great, or even greater. And then second, of course, the election's coming up, and there's a big ballot initiative on the election, and it would be called Vote Yes for Regional Transit. You can get more information at that URL, voteyesforregionaltransit.com, to learn about what this would do to improve our region's transit system, connecting workers to businesses and connecting people to places for work, doctor visits, visiting grandma. And so it's really needed because we have one of the least connected systems in the United States, and this funds would raise, I think, $4.3 billion over a 20-year period. In comparison, Seattle and Las Vegas have something like $24 billion ballot initiatives on their election this November to expand their transit services. So we're just getting started, and they're expanding. So this is all about, in my opinion, playing catch-up to benefit the people of our region. So thank you.
And I would...
I'm sorry,
Sure.
I forgot one other thing. You brought up Halloween. Do we have an official time on Halloween that everyone should plan to go trick-or-treating? Generally, I think it's like 6 to 8, but sometimes I get calls from people saying, oh, what's the time? When should people, start handing out candy, or how long does it go for? So does the city have a time?
We do not have an official time.
We encourage.
I think we've encouraged, what? We encourage 6 to 8. It's not a rule or an ordinance or anything like that.
That's what I've always stuck with.
Yeah.
Candy's out.
Is that common for a community to not set a time? I always thought communities generally set.
It's all over the board.
It is? Okay, thank you.
I will piggyback on what Councilwoman Piana just said. I think transit is not only long overdue and important for this region, but selfishly, there's probably no community that will benefit more than one along the Woodward Corridor, which would be the first leg of the BRT. And so I think that...
Bus Rapid Transit.
The Bus Rapid Transit. So despite all the great work that Jordan and his team is doing, there's probably nothing more important that we could do for the economic development and success of the future of our city than to support transit along Woodward. So I hope folks vote yes, even selfishly.
It will be on
for
Michigan and Gratiot Ave too, but we will
That's
be
correct.
the spine that gets built first.
That's right. A couple other things. I just want to say how excited I am and proud of our football team. I'm going to reiterate that. They did an awesome job. And then they didn't rest on their laurels because they won again, even though they were already in the playoffs. And so even though we maybe will be an underdog to Martin Luther King, I know the guys are fired up and ready to play. When I became mayor, I kidded the chief that before he or I retired that we got to get to the playoffs, and it's been 8 years, but we made it, chief. So I guess I don't want
I could talk all night about it, Your Honor, but I
I know you could, but truly, they work so hard year in and year out, and so they just deserve all the credit in the world. And so, go Eagles on Friday and beat Martin Luther King. I want to also reiterate what Trustee Butters said. It was the prayer breakfast that was put on by the Southeast Coalition was just a wonderful event. It was their first annual, and I love this. They say that because their intent is to do this each year and to grow it. But over 200 participants, and just a really powerful and meaningful way for the community, and not just our community, but a lot of representation from the other communities represented in our school district. So in particular the township, which I don't think we do enough with. It was really good to get to know more of the folks from the township, and so I just want to thank those people who put that on, including the people at our police department who helped organize that with them, and look forward to the second annual. Finally, I just want to say I'm excited to be speaking tomorrow at the induction of the National Honor Society at the high school and giving remarks there. I was telling a friend of mine that it's very ironic because I wasn't in the National Honor Society when I myself was in high school, and she said, "You might not want to lead with that in your comments." But congratulations to all of the high school students who are getting inducted tomorrow night at the National Honor Society, and I will see you tomorrow. And with that, our meeting is adjourned.